Good evening and welcome to the 29th meeting of fiscal 2023 for the Milton Planning Board. At this time, I would like to now call our meeting to order. We can begin by introducing ourselves. Members, Jim?
Jim Davis, member, Planning Board.
Maggie?
Maggie Oldfield, member.
Sean?
Sean Fahey, member.
And myself, Meredith Hall, serving as chair. Cheryl Tougias will be joining us in a few minutes. And now I'd like to introduce our staff. Julia?
Julia Getman, clerk.
Tim?
Tim Zerwinski, Director of Planning and Community Development.
And Josh?
Josh Eckertley, Assistant Town Planner.
Great, thank you, and welcome to everyone who's joining us this evening. We can first begin with our administrative items. We have 3 sets of minutes to approve, and those would be the May 11th, May 18th, and June 8th. Has everyone had a chance to read those?
Yep. The only edit or addition I had was on June 8th.
Yes, I did see that there was a...
I just wanted to, under the public hearing for 1200 Brush Hill Road, when it said a portion of the stone wall that was removed will be rebuilt using original materials, and just add, with any new materials needed to complete the wall will match in color and size to the existing stone on site.
And that's accurate. So with that, and I did not attend the May 18th, so why don't we just do individual votes on these, then we can amend that at that time. If I can have a motion to approve the meeting minutes, first of May 11th.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of May 11th.
I was absent.
Oh, you were absent on that, okay.
Second.
Second, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
3 of us, okay. And then for the 18th, we have a, if I could have a motion on that to approve those meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the May 18th meeting minutes.
A second?
And a second.
And roll all in favor, and I'm abstaining because I was not there.
Aye.
Great, okay, that is approved. And let's see, and then finally, we have the June 8th, and Cheryl was the only one who was not in attendance on that, so we can go ahead and make a motion to approve that, subject to the edits made by, the addition made by Maggie.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, June 8th, subject to Maggie's amendments.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you all. Very good. Discussion of next meeting dates. We have, our next meeting is July 13th. And then Tim, did we decide on the next MBTA? Is there a final date on that next meeting for the MBTA?
We have set July 17th as the date for that one.
Okay, July 17th, okay. And then the following meeting would be for the 27th of July. I am actually away that week. So Tim, I'm just wondering, we may need to get a public hearing scheduled for 111 Highland Street, possibly at that point. And maybe we can work with them. Otherwise, we can go ahead and meet, and Cheryl could be as secretary, the substitute chair, or we could try to move that, or if we don't have anything pending on our agenda, since we're meeting for the MBTA discussion on the 17th, possibly not having a meeting that week. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I can. So I was going to go over to this a little bit in the staff update, but we can do a preview of coming attractions. The 111 Highland hearing had been continued to the 13th. That's correct. That's why we're not hearing them tonight, right?
Right.
So they may be requesting a further continuance. I'll know a little bit more about that tomorrow. So when I do hear from them, we can probably talk about kind of, when we think they'll be ready, whether it would be, that normal, second meeting in July, or, perhaps we can do something the following week or the previous week or whatever. So I'll get a little bit more context from that applicant. And then we can bring it to the next meeting and kind of figure out a schedule from there.
That sounds great. So let's keep that. So for now, it's the 13th, our regular scheduled meeting, and the 17th for the MBTA.
So that's a Monday, is that correct? The 17th is a Monday, Tim. That's the MBTA presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
At 7?
Also a public hearing for 152 Robbins Street coming up.
Correct. And we're thinking.
We haven't yet scheduled that one. That was another staff update item.
Right, which we were thinking about for the 13th. So why don't we move right now? We can go into staff update. Tim.
Okay, great. Sorry. Yeah, so that was kind of, feeding into the scheduling question. Is we did get an application for a site plan approval for a project at 152 Robbins Street. We have a little bit of flexibility in terms of when we can start scheduling that. We're obligated to open the public hearing within 65 days of receiving the application. But I think, given, the other public hearing perhaps shifting around, we may want to advertise that hearing, for July 13th. So I think, there's a little bit of flux in the schedule. So, I guess what I would, I'm trying to think without knowing what a second July meeting date would be. I kind of think we should just schedule that hearing for the 13th and then, play it where it lies. If we have two public hearings and we need to kind of cut one short and continue it, we can certainly do that. But, without knowing what that second meeting in July is going to be, I don't want to get, too far out where, we're up against the gun in terms of, scheduling that hearing for 152 Robbins Street.
Certainly. Okay. That's great. We can plan on that.
Is that okay? I don't want to
I think
make
that's a good, I
assumptions
think
for
that's a
anybody.
good plan. Yeah. To plan to schedule that.
Yeah, so just to preview that a little bit, and we'll we'll send out the materials next week. I didn't want to kind of bog people down ahead of this meeting. We have reviewed the materials. They are sufficient, for starting the hearing. It's a residential property that's owned by Josh, which church is it that owns it, or it's a religious group that owns the house?
It's the Seventh-day Adventist.
Yes. So the Seventh-day Adventists own this house, and they'd like to build a farm stand on it, and selling products that are grown on site and also products that are grown off site. So that type of agricultural use is a Dover Amendment protected use, not dissimilar from our, relatively frequent adventures in daycare. Agricultural uses are also Dover Amendment uses. A little bit more complicated than simply, a daycare center. There are, as Maggie knows, really stringent and specific rules about, what constitutes an agricultural use in terms of products sold on site, products sold from the region. There's all sorts of kind of monitoring that has to go into that. So, it's a physically, I think, relatively straightforward project. But the sort of the added bells and whistles of the agricultural requirements are a little tricky. And so that's something that, we'll want to keep a very close eye on. And obviously, we'll be working with the new building commissioner about, what exactly his stance is going to be in terms of monitoring and all of that. But you'll see all that when the application materials go out. So it's an interesting one. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly under staff update, and Meredith had asked me to follow up on this, is our East Milton zoning kickoff. I've met with the MAPC team. We actually did a walk through the neighborhood about a week and a half ago, just to sort of show the project manager around, get him situated with with the situation in East Milton, kind of put a face to the maps, as it were. So that was very good. They're going to be spending the summertime doing kind of desktop background research type activities, reviewing the existing zoning, reviewing the existing planning documents. They've obviously taken a look at those in their RFP response, but I think really kind of rolling up their sleeves and understanding kind of the context, with the idea that more wide-ranging public outreach would happen in the fall. Understanding, obviously that summertime is a tough time to do public meetings, as we discover every summer. They thought it was a good time to sort of get prepared, get materials ready, get do all the research and analysis necessary, and then kind of come out in the fall with some broader public outreach. To that end, they are targeting, and if our schedule is what it typically is, the first meeting in August for a meeting with the planning board, to come in and kind of talk through what their strategy is going to be, what their approach to public outreach is going to be, all the things that they're going to need direct planning board advice on. So that would typically be August 10th, which is open and available for the MAPC team. But that becomes up to you all in terms of the future meeting schedule, and if that's going to be something where that's going to stay August 10th, or if we need to shuffle that around to accommodate folks. So that would be, the sooner we can get clarity on that, the better. But that's when they would want to meet with the planning board and kind of kick off, again, that sort of public facing aspect of the project.
That's great, Tim. Yeah, why don't you have them just reserve that date? I think at this time, it's probably better to plan ahead and have a firm date scheduled with them so they're available.
All right, will do. That's all I've got for now. We'll wind up probably talking about other things I would normally talk about when we get to the other agenda items, including committee updates. So
that's great. Thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is Citizen Speak. If there's anyone who would like to speak on anything that is not on our agenda this evening, you will have an opportunity to speak when we're on that specific item. But I would welcome anyone from the audience, and welcome Cheryl too. Is there anyone with hands up in the audience who would like to speak?
I'm not seeing anyone on the Zoom right now.
Right now. Okay, great. And I know we have one person here, but who's going to speak on a later agenda item. So now we can move to committee updates. I know some folks are, Jim, I know you're new. Capital Improvements hasn't met yet.
I am sworn in.
Cycle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but you're sworn in. Good. That's the most important, that everybody gets sworn in. So we'll hold off on you. You obviously don't have an update. And any other committees, have you had any activity on?
No, so I'm on the fair housing, which hasn't met in over a year.
Yeah.
And then on the climate action, so I am sworn in as well, and I just got an email saying that we're preparing to meet shortly, and we're getting our schedules together.
Great, good. And Sean?
No action right now on my committee, although I am also sworn in, and I had submitted my executed documents to Gail.
Okay, great. That's important. And Cheryl, one of our next items, you will be we will be nominating you for the CPC, which you had told me you were attending. The meetings, and you thought that that's something that you would be able to do. So we haven't confirmed it yet, but we'll see how. Yeah.
I did say I would do it. They had a meeting last night, and they didn't have a quorum. So if I had been sworn in, then they would have helped with the quorum.
Yeah.
So, so yes, I thus far have
that's new.
believe that I can do it.
Well, going forward, that's great, because they've already started their cycle. The applications were due on the June 1st. So.
Which is why it would be good to get. That's why I asked you to get it on, because this would be the time to help or participate, right?
Absolutely, as they're sort of looking at
Right.
all those. So thank you for stepping up to do that. And then any new on
The master plan?
master plan implementation?
Well, I need to get sworn in again for that, but we have a meeting on Monday, so I'll get
Okay.
sworn in tomorrow. We are going through the big topic areas of the plan
Right.
and seeing where we think updates may be warranted. And we've been monitoring the progress, this spreadsheet of checklists. And some of you have been on watching the meetings.
Long
It's a
spreadsheet.
it's
Yeah.
a detailed
Yeah.
spreadsheet, a lot of
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
So we felt like that was
Impressive.
kind of the way to get a handle on what might need to be updated. So we invited Sustainable Milton to come in, I think it was in December or January, to provide us guidance on what they felt, might be
Right.
added to the plan or improved upon in the plan with regard to sustainability and climate change. And Monday, we're having I'm going to get the name of the committee incorrect, but it's the Social Justice Committee that was formed and submitted the report to the Select Board and made a presentation.
Cheryl, that's the Equity and Justice for All Committee. For the
Thank
minute.
you, thank you.
Thanks.
I should have looked at that again, and in any case,
Yeah.
the co-chairs are coming to the meeting on Monday and will give us an overview of their work, and we'll consider how that work might inform updates to the master plan. And then we're going to do each month a different topic, so we'll do transportation. So member Dick Burke he served on the Traffic Mitigation Committee, so we have a lot of new committee members, so he'll give an update on that. And he has expressed some frustration that the report that they did and the recommendations that were in the report are not moving forward fast enough. So there might be some ways to have the master plan update help reinforce that. So and then we'll move on to other topics in the meetings that follow that. So if you have any questions for me?
Good. Well, tying into that, and this is on that subject, but it wasn't on the agenda, but I did, and Josh attended the preservation, that it was MBTA and doing, and we could talk about it during MBTA too, but preservation along, how you look at preservation while you're doing MBTA. And one of the things that came out of that, which I've discussed with Tim, was that Ipswich, which actually has 2 years, but really Brookline has a preservation planner. And so in Ipswich, with the number of historic properties, they actually have an intern this summer and who's looking at hiring a consultant to do a preservation plan for their town. And I feel like now that we have our CPC funds, we have this, it's part of our master plan, but that would be something that would really make sense for Milton to actually have a preservation plan and have a consultant that, whether it's funded through the planning board jointly, but have an actual plan for how we preserve the properties and build historic buildings and landscapes in town. So
I did watch the tapes, so thanks for sending the link along. And I saw that. Do you know what goes into those master plans? I saw that they would do an inventory, and they had inventory sheets, I think, that were showing basically documenting kind of the existing historic areas.
It'll be
Do you know-
interesting because I think that would be what we could have an in-house intern do, is to evaluate what other towns have done and what the criteria they used in hiring a consultant to actually put that plan together.
And how do you think that works? Would that work in tandem with the Historic District Study Committee? Do you know?
It could be one of the goals of the it could be part of a preservation plan.
Is to
I think it
adopt a
would be
district or two?
possibly. So
Well, it's interesting. I mean,
evaluate.
Yeah.
so I think we could piggyback on sort of what some other communities are doing and looking at that, but
Well,
not that,
preserving the character of Milton obviously is one of the primary goals of the plan.
right.
How one does that and preserving private property rights and all that, I guess is always the challenge, right? Because that's the districts. Some of it's voluntary and some of it's mandatory, right? But certainly the historic districts was something that was recommended in the plan, so moving forward on that study committee. And I saw that they initially recommended Milton Village, which is something that I had thought of and had suggested at a meeting of theirs that I attended, thinking, I don't know that it was MBTA communities necessarily that I had in mind, but anytime you have zoning which is allowing for, new things, if you have a way to protect the historic, that's, it allows you to do both.
And there was a lot of that in
Yeah,
there,
so I
Well, we
think,
can move, but that's great. That sounds like, is there anything else too that you working on that?
Wait, just can I, as a follow-up to that presentation, I watched that as well. And I went on to the Ipswich website, and they have a whole streetscape
Yes.
plan. And I thought that was really interesting, and maybe that we should look into adopting that or something similar, because it would then sort of tie into trees and what we want our streets to look like. And I'm not part of the Garden Club, but I think the Garden Club actually has some funding from Garden Club of America to do some wild flowers along a certain streetscapes funded by the Garden Centers of America. And I think they were looking to work with the town to create like a nice, monarch butterfly pollinator along strips in town. So I think working with other town
Right,
departments,
absolutely.
and that's what they said in Ipswich that they did. And the other thing they said was getting a good survey of the town of what our current buildings look like. So then when new projects come, and a form-based architect is new to me, or zoning, so I'm learning a little bit more about that. And if we sort of adopt some sort of form-based, which at first I wasn't really sort of bought into, but if we have a survey of the town and the architecture that we like and identify with in town, then that can be sort of what our goals are, and what, if we're going to go
Right,
to form-based architecture, it's going to mimic what we already have.
one thing I would say is that having gone through the Elliott Street corridor, I think I mentioned to you by bike and mostly therefore on foot when but I took a lot of photographs of the housing stock along there, and there's so much variety, so I think one thing that I had talked with Tim about was if you have small lots, so let's say the 5,000 square foot, which are undersized even for residency, but if you said, okay, this is the kind of housing stock you have in that kind of smaller lot area, and then if you jump that up to 7,500 square foot, and then 10,000 and so forth, you can start to get variety within the smaller, variety within the sort of, different range of sizes, because, it's interesting, speaking of that, the new construction off of Pleasant, a subdivision that this board sort of reluctantly approved. I was talking to a resident who lives across the street, and they were talking about how big those homes are on such small lots. So that the kind of housing is sort of the 21st century kind of housing, but there's so much other housing that's so much
Certainly.
different scale.
Yeah.
So
By different periods of time when the town
yeah.
is.
So I guess there's going to be a balance between what the market wants, if the market thinks that they need these bigger homes, and the historic stock that we have, which is different scale than that. So this sort of form base is going to have to kind of think about that a little bit, at least on the single family and maybe the two family side. But I think certainly the things that are probably stand out even more so are sort of the multifamily, the bigger buildings, right? Sort of the kind of
Well, we can talk
Family
about more of this
character.
when we get to the MBTA.
Sorry, yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure
Yep.
that you had time to, and I just, while you had mentioned that was one of the things that would be nice to see. We could work together with the Master Plan Implementation Committee on maybe having a consultant come and put a plan together. And then open space, Tim, I don't know if you want to, Tim is sort of our chair of this committee, but we hired the consultant Horsley Witten to update our open space and recreation plan. This is a plan that's updated every 7 years. And Tim, why don't you talk, the work is very exciting, what's been happening. And if you just want to give sort of an overview of where we are.
Yeah, no, thanks, Meredith. Definitely not the chair. Want to make that clear, although we have a vacancy for the chair that we need to fill. So I'm just trying to keep my hand on the tiller. So we've been doing a fair amount of, as is typically the case with these plans, some sort of background style work in terms of GIS mapping and kind of getting updated parcel data about all of the open space resources in town. It's actually a lot more complicated, I think, than it should be, but this is what happens when you don't update your plan for 16 years. But it's been taking a little bit. We've been doing some updates and revisions of the text of the old plan in terms of, the town's history and bits about the flora and fauna in town and development patterns and all the sort of good stuff that is sort of the background of the plan. I think, over the course of the summer and into the fall, we'll be entering into a more public-facing aspect of the plan. So our consultant at Horsley Witten is working on a survey that we want to get wide distribution of to really start to gauge people's, how people use our open spaces, what they feel are kind of gaps in our portfolio of open spaces, whether it's passive recreation or trails or playing fields or dog parks or, all of that stuff. So we'll be, widely publicizing that. We're going to have the first of a couple public forums, which we're in the process of scheduling. And then there's some other, different types of outreach we're trying to do, focus groups, setting up listening posts at, various, whether it's the farmer's market or the concerts at Town Hall on Wednesdays. One thing I'm actually discovering, and I guess, if my little guy was a little older, I would know this. I was hoping to sort of post up at a Little League game and sort of, hand out literature and whatever. But, that season is actually over or almost over. And now everyone kind of goes off to their travel teams. And so I'd have to follow Milton Little League to Maine if I wanted to get people to complete my survey. But, we're trying to get out there, once we've got all that stuff in place to sort of let people know, there are, zoning is very exciting to us as sort of, planning adjacent folks. But, open space, recreation, this is stuff that I think people get really excited about and feel really passionate about. And so I think we can get some really good engagement and some really good ideas. So, that'll be sort of going on again the summer into the fall. Fall is going to be a really busy time for the department and for this board in terms of, all of the different plans that we have that are starting to come to a head. So I think we're going to be doing a lot of really exciting things. But, the open space plan, we're going to depend on everybody to kind of, spread that information to their networks, get people kind of interested and involved. Answering the survey is going to be really important because that's the kind of thing, where we start to map out, okay, I think when we talked about, pickleball is a great example, when we talked about that recommendation for the CPC, what are the types of recreational facilities that we need for the population that we have? I think we have really great facilities in town and, really great staff and really great volunteers that kind of keep them up. But, the whole point of the plan is to, judge for the next several years, what are our needs in the future? And so it's going to be really important to get really broad kind of engagement with that plan. So Meredith is absolutely right. Very exciting things happening. It's been a little bit of a long time coming. So I'm really excited for this one to be out in public a little bit more.
Right, great. Yeah, and it's been exciting to realize, we've been sort of limited in what we've done for land acquisitions in the town. as everyone knows, we're so, short of, we feel like, with land. But what's happened even in the private sector, between the Wakefield estate, the Eustis estate, we have such incredible jewels in this town. And a lot of people are still discovering the Wakefield estate and the Eustis estate, but those are two sort of private preservation projects that have occurred just since the last time the plan's been done. So it's good to sort of recognize that and tie that into sort of the history of things that the town has done. So when someone's reading the report 100 years from now, they can look back and say, look what was happening here. So all good. So thank you. So that concludes our committee updates. And we can now move on to new business. As we mentioned earlier, Cheryl has agreed to be our CPC rep to the committee, but we just need to formally make that nomination. So if anybody would, I think.
I'd be happy to.
Would you like to make that?
I'd like to make a nomination that Cheryl Tougias serve as the planning board member for the Community Preservation Committee.
Great, second?
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you for serving on that.
Cheryl.
And that'll be fun to hear the updates on that too. So that's great.
They have 22, I think, applications.
Did they? I was worried that they
They had
might not have.
24, I think it's down to 22, just so you know.
That's great.
But that's all I know. is
That's
that the number, and
wonderful.
I don't know what
However,
the
the
content
funding
is.
is lower now, right? I mean, we had accumulated 2 years of funding, right, that we utilized in the last town meeting. Yeah.
Yes. I have to get fully up to speed with, so what I know is what you know from the presentation from town meeting
Yeah.
in terms of the funding. So yes, it will be less this time. And I don't know what the content of those 22, but
Right.
Julia is the staff person
Right.
that right?
for the committee, so she can help me with updates. And
Email you the list if you're interested.
Yeah,
in
sure.
Who's doing what.
Yeah.
Are there any applications for open space? Because I know some people mentioned that it was too bad that no one applied for.
Yeah, there's improvements to like Pope's Pond
Right,
area
yes,
and
those.
trail.
Yeah. Which is wonderful, yeah.
there may
And
be
the
some.
ball fields.
Yeah, I think there may be some that were encouraged to apply for the second round that received funds in the first round to, assist with the total funding package.
Right.
Right,
Kimberly Park.
yeah, I think that's,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Good. It's all good.
Cheryl, where will the time, the schedule for those particular initiatives be? Where is that? Where can you find that, or where can we find that? Start, complete?
there's a
For like
website.
when they're looked over and.
No, when the work's actually going to happen.
When they get the grant money, like they're working on the grant agreements
Yeah.
with the grantees.
Okay.
So they have to have an agreement so that, before the funds can be released. But I think once
It was, the funding was
Julia?
supposed to be released on July 1st, like the first of the new year.
Mhm.
The treasurer's office is working on that now for last year's.
Yeah,
funding.
yeah.
But Kathleen is working on the grant agreements for some of the
Yeah.
Yeah, so the lack of quorum last night meant that the grant agreements couldn't be discussed and reviewed. So there's
Understood.
going to be a meeting that was scheduled last night for next week to do that. So hopefully those will be finalized, right? And then the funds can be released when, I guess, the treasurer's office is ready?
Yes, they said around the 20th.
But for the projects that were approved at the last town meeting,
Yeah.
some projects have already begun. I know the Milton Garden Club received for a Fletcher Steele historic garden, and stonework is going to begin this June. So
Great.
it's all going to be open to the public for people who want to come and learn how to. And actually, we've been offered a tour of dry stone walls. So when we're looking at stone walls and what we're describing, the person who's going to be doing the work is an accredited dry stone waller. It's an association that he belongs to, and there's a specific way you do it. And he's offered to give the Historical Commission and the Planning Board a tour at some point of some of examples of some walls to look at, for example. So.
Nice.
Great. I'd like to
maybe
go
get
on
an-
that. That'd be
Yeah,
interesting.
so I'll have Tim send out an email. Maybe we can pick a date.
She's also sent out a missive looking for volunteers to help with the stonework.
Yeah.
So, did you get that?
It's posted on Everything Milton.
Oh.
I know it went to the Garden Club. So as anyone who is interested, yes.
I think
Georgia
it's this
Lee.
Saturday, isn't it?
It's this Saturday, yes. But it only is only up to 10, I think. So it is on Everything Milton. So,
I can forward that too.
okay.
If you guys want.
And if anybody from the public is interested, please feel free to reach out to the office, and I can give the email of the person who's to RSVP to. So, okay, good. So with that approval, then we can go on to old business. Tim, do you want to kick us off with the MBTA Communities update?
Sure thing, Meredith. Thank you. So still waiting on our sort of second round of model runs from MAPC. We've kind of run into a little bit of a buzzsaw of different folks on our team over there kind of being out on vacation for a week here and a week there. So we were expecting materials maybe a week or two ago. So we'll be following up on that. I'm going to elevate that request higher up the food chain over there because there's a domino that needs to fall there in order for UTL to complete their work and in order for other folks that we have on board to kind of start their work. So as soon as we've got something from them, I'll obviously distribute that so everyone can kind of start to digest it. And whether it's the next planning board meeting or the next public forum that we do, we'll have something to show for that.
Tim, can I just interject for a moment?
Sure.
Part of our criteria in our reasoning in selecting MAPC for the East Milton overlay had to do with their capacity. Are you seeing any capacity challenges? I don't think it's on the agenda, but hopefully maybe you covered it in citizens or in staff update, but the status of East Milton Square.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, it's just while I understand that they have entitled to vacations and so forth, we're up against a hard deadline in December.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is
and
maybe the
no,
board
I
can
hear
convey
exactly
through
what
you
you're
to
saying,
MAPC.
and I think it's a good question, and it's a question I'll raise with them on kind of both counts. Because I think with I'm a little less concerned with the East Milton project, if only because we've got a more formalized contract, we've got a more formalized scope of work, we've got a bigger team over there that's kind of on file as sort of being on the project. So I have some concerns, but at least on that one, I think raising the concern and kind of getting on everyone's radar, hopefully will be sufficient for now. With the compliance modeling, part of me gets it, because they are doing work on behalf of a lot of other different communities, and it is a smaller team that's kind of stretched in a bunch of different directions. That being said, we were expecting material before now. We haven't gotten it. And you're right. We're kind of waiting on this stuff in order to make decisions that are going to have downstream effects. And it's not much further downstream where we need to start seeing those effects. So I'll continue to press on that. UTL has been able to do some other work that we've got an update meeting with them tomorrow. That we're expecting to get a handoff of some materials. They are going to be doing test fits for the Granite Avenue district, which I think will be an interesting one in terms of kind of what they feel can kind of be accommodated on those sites, both the Legion Hall, DPW yard site, and then also the 2 Granite Ave site. And then the other thing that they're going to provide for us, which will be, I think, also very useful, as we start to sort of shape or think about shaping the transit area district, is they're going to be looking at that transit area in terms of where we can start to trim that district in order to lower our denominator basically of land area and kind of boost our numerator of units so that we can get that overall sort of district density number up and get that unit capacity number down. Because I think right now we have, we're kind of off the scales on unit capacity, we're off the scales on district size, and we're sort of under on the overall density. So that's, they're going to be fine tuning some areas where there's suggestions for either trimming that district or kind of, shaping the district lines in a way that can kind of help us get those numbers a little bit more in tune. So, that's something that, we're going to meet with them tomorrow and get a handoff of materials. Once I have those in hand, we will share them immediately. And then just the other thing, we executed the contract on both ends with RKG Associates to begin the fiscal impact analysis. So I literally just sent that off at like 4:00 today. So I'll be working with our project manager over there to kind of figure out when they can come in front of you all to start to get some of that information about what exactly we're looking for them to test in terms of time horizons and kind of, reasonable expectations for build out. So we'll have more details on that, when I hear back from them, now that they're kind of fully officially under contract. That's something where, a lot of that stuff can happen in the background. They'll need some initial input from the planning board, but a lot of that work involves, again, desktop analysis. They'll be interviewing town staff about budgets and staffing needs, in the schools, at the police department, DPW, et cetera. So that was good news. We were able to get all of that done in a really timely way. So that's going to be a really important thing to get out there. And again, hopefully that gets done on a good timeline. So that's where we are in terms of, the sort of technical assistance we're getting, both, from state resources and then from grant resources that we've procured ourselves. We did have our monthly public forum last week at the Keys Room at the library. Good attendance, a lot of good questions. Folks had a lot of good questions again about compliance, about the status of the Mattapan trolley as high speed transit. It was a little bit of a lighter agenda in terms of information, so it was a good chance to sort of just engage in conversation with folks. So that recording, Josh, do we have that recording yet? Is that up?
So Tim,
Sorry, I'm fighting with the dog. The recording is up, but it's the recording that we took, not MATV's recording. That'll be switched over in the coming days.
Okay. Yeah, we had to do a little bit of a sort of DIY punk rock recording that we're hoping MATV can clean up a little bit, because we do think it's important to get these recordings out there, but MATV was not available to be in the flesh taping us. So someone had a question there?
yeah, I just wanted to ask, and maybe it's a suggestion. Do you have sign-up sheets? I'm just curious about how many new folks we're getting at these forums.
There was a sign-up sheet there.
Josh manned the sign-up sheet.
Great,
What do you?
okay.
Yes,
on that?
we did have a sign-in sheet. There were not everyone who showed up signed in. There were 13 signees, and it covered 6 different precincts. So we got a pretty wide margin. They were mostly sort of frequent flyers. Only 2 of the email addresses we got were new, as though they hadn't either submitted their email directly to me or to our survey. So not a ton of new faces who used the sign-in sheet, but we do have those, and we're tracking that.
I'm getting concerned that we're going to get to December and people are not going to know about it still. And
Well, one of the things that I was going to tell you that you missed, you probably read the minutes from the last meeting,
Right.
and I don't know if you watched the tape, but
not yet, no.
one of the things that I'm hearing from residents on, and it was brought up at this meeting, and Tim inferred, working with the select board, and I actually had spoke with Mike Zulis following the planning board meeting, is that we would really like to demonstrate that we are working, to be compliant, but that I feel strongly, we are not we've been put into a classification of high-speed transit, which if you look at our trolley, we really are more like in Arlington, which is considered an adjacent community. We're not on a high-speed transit line. We do not have a high-speed transit stop in Milton. We are not a commuter line. We do not have a commuter stop in Milton. What we are is an adjacent community which has an antique trolley which runs and drops you off at a high-speed transit station. So there's a number of reasons, and we're actually going to be meeting and having a discussion on what is facts, what does MBTA say about the trolley, and the definition of high-speed transit. Our trolley is not high-speed transit, and it's not on the map as a high-speed transit line, a stop on the red line. It is a connector, an antique trolley, and we've been classified as high-speed transit, not even by MBTA, but really DHCD, who's tried to categorize, and I understand for efficiency, based on where you are, and we're being compared to a Brookline, we're being compared to a Newton, who honestly have staff, 3 times as many staff members, and if you are high-speed transit, you have 1 year, but if you are an adjacent community or on a commuter line, you get 2 years. And I feel that our numbers would be reduced. It would make much more sense for us to be considered an adjacent community with the numbers of units that we would have to zone for. But more importantly, it's the time that we would get is commuter lines have 2 years to do this work, and we've been asked to do this in 1 year. And really, for what I see is as incredibly deficient. Not only is it not high-speed transit, but it's in really bad condition, and we have no idea.
They did have a meeting this week, which
Yeah.
I know Jim attended, I attended, I know Tim attended, with an update on what they're doing. So in terms of its condition, that's worth watching if you didn't attend it.
Well,
but as far as
They're years out from what I got from that. I mean,
But I think to the relevance of your point is, to your point, we need time for the people in town to understand what this is all about. This is the worst time of year to invite anybody in the public to any meeting, no matter what it is. It's June, July, August. We're going to have these public MBTA forums that Tim and Josh are going to present. And there's going to be very few people that are going to be available, for June, July, and August. It's vacation season. So we have, I think, we have a very significant issue. The point that you're making, people don't even know about this. They just don't know about it. It's a small percentage of people. I'd be curious to know how many people actually attended that MBTA presentation. I don't know.
they
Julie,
had 100 and
16, I think it
100.
was.
that's unbelievable.
But a
That's
lot from
shocking
Boston
for how few.
and a lot from Milton.
Yeah, it's shocking for how few. But, the point that you made, and I don't know, you probably saw that screenshot of the ridership. Did you see that? Mm-hmm. It was stunning. The daily ridership at Valley Road, there were 10 people that board daily, 17 people that board at Capon Street, 80 people that board at Butler, 71 that board, Cedar Grove is another place, Milton, 196, Central Ave, 557. Total boardings, weekly average, this is the MBTA data, 3,823, with the vast majority boarding in Ashmont, that's 1,582, in Mattapan, 1,310. So when I look at it and I see a total of 3,823 boardings, divide that by 2, because most people are boarding in one location and then boarding later in the day in another location to return. This line, you've made this point a number of times, I think everybody has. How could you ever consider this? what they're considering it. This is not, a transit line like they're describing it. And that's the MBTA data. That's not anybody else's, that's theirs. So
I guess my-
Well, I think an important thing to remember about ridership is that the land use around the station is the defining factor in the ridership.
The what?
And when you talk about Valley Road, which has an average density of 4.8 units per acre, when you get to Capon Street, 4 units per acre. In kind of relative terms, no one lives near these stations, and so no one uses them. When you actually get to places where there's actual, residential density, JFK UMass, 16 units per acre. I'm clicking on Roxbury Crossing, 11 units per acre. Fenway Park Station on the Green Line, 40 units per acre. This is where the ridership is. And really the point of the MBTA Communities Law is we have these resources, they're there. There's a ton of capacity on the Mattapan line, but not enough people live around these stations to make adequate use of that capacity. And so, to look at the ridership numbers is actually to make the state's point for them and say, you've got this resource, you've got this train that comes every 6 minutes that will take you to Ashmont Station, but no one's using it because the land use is so, relatively underdeveloped.
Tim, it's the densest neighborhood in Milton, isn't it? And this is about a classification of an existing line. Your view is a futuristic line. Your view is a futuristic point of view. I'm talking about what it is right now. It is not.
I mean, what it is right now is it's a train that comes every 6 minutes in the peak hour that has plenty of room for people to get on and get to the red line and get downtown.
But you have to change trains. It's a connector. It's like in Arlington, you have transportation modes which bring you to Alewife. But the Alewife station isn't in Arlington, so they are considered an adjacent community. They have buses that travel, they have, transportation that gets you to that Alewife station, but the Alewife station is not in Arlington. And the Ashmont station is not in, we don't have a high transit stop, and you have to get off our little trolley, and I love our little trolley. I think it's the cutest thing. It's orange, it's not even red. So it's, but it is definitely, let's just say the MBTA would not have left our stairs in such decrepit condition for 20 years if we were on a high-speed transit line. That would not have been.
I would argue that they've neglected that line, and it's being called to their attention because of social justice issues. They have neglected that connector, which is important to a number of commuters, and I think we have to be mindful of that. That line is, they're investing in that line because they've heard that message. In fact, they said that in the Zoom the other night that most of the people who use that line are using it to get to Ashmont to take the red line, right? So that's an important factor for Boston and the region in terms of climate change is not to have to get in the car. I'll do an anecdote now. My son just started a job in downtown Boston. He tried the red line, and then he found it took him over an hour to get to South Station. And I suggested to him to try the commuter rail from Mattapan, from Cummins Highway, which is just outside of our red line at Mattapan Station, right? But it's reliable.
Do they have parking there?
No, they don't have parking there, but they have parking at Reedville at the same line, one stop further. People are making choices right now because of the quality of the service that the MBTA throughout the system is struggling with. It's not indicative of just this line and what people are making a choice not to ride it right now because they need to have a reliable way to get to work. And if you drive into Boston now from Milton, it's just outrageous. It's worse than pre-COVID because more people are in their cars driving because it's a problem that it's got to get resolved. And so I think making these arguments, I absolutely agree on time. that we could use the time. I absolutely agree, it's hard to get people to engage in the summer. But I want us to be careful about how we go about making an argument for those things based on the quality of service.
It's
and
also
whether they're-
capacity.
and-
It's capacity.
And
is
the
really
other thing they said in their presentation was they will have increased capacity with the new cars. Granted, everything takes time.
Well, then we can
we're
talk
taking more time.
I want to make sure,
Between the stops is an issue with classifying as rapid transit and the speed of the trains classifying
I think
as slower than rapid
we are
transit.
better off looking at the analysis of what this means for Milton for numbers of units, and rather than arguing whether we're rapid transit. That's my personal opinion, because I think we
I think
were in a
both. I think we
better
need to look at both.
position to demonstrate, this is Milton, this is what we think we can do to contribute to the housing shortfall that the state has. And showing them, rather than putting up a white flag and surrendering and say, no, we're
No,
not
no,
going to
no,
do
that's
it. This is just, I'm
Yeah,
saying,
I agree with that.
my
That's-
opinion, because we have all these 40Bs, because we said that law shouldn't apply to us in Milton, and it didn't for a long time because nobody used it. But then all of a sudden, we had all these 40B developments, okay? So we know that Milton, as far as DHCD is concerned, is that's been our position. If we come at this law with that same position, I think we're going to not
And
be
that's
viewed
where
favorably.
I just want to be clear on that, and I made it very clear to Tim that whatever approach we take, it is in good faith that we are wanting to be compliant, but we want to be treated fairly as a town. And I think the classification that we've been put in is not fair, because we've been put into the same bucket with Newton, Brookline, and
Chelsea.
just
Yeah.
towns that really do have high-speed transit, and we really don't have high-speed transit.
I want to
So-
make my position clear on the improvement to the line. I am all for it. I'm not against improving the line. I listened to what they presented. I think it's great. Putting trolley cars on there that are 74 feet long instead of 38 feet long, increase the number of ridership, improve the cars, change all the train stations. It's long overdue. My argument is that we are classified incorrectly. We are absolutely classified. We cannot be a rapid. How could we be a rapid transit community? We can't be.
They'd have to change the tracks. The tracks are completely
It
different.
just doesn't make any sense at all. And I do believe what you said, Cheryl, that we're in this classification because of how we're judged as a town, for how we may have acted over decades with respect to housing. So that doesn't justify being called a rapid transit community if you're just not one.
And I think they're classifying us as one because of our proximity to Boston. 100%. That if that we're kind of being penalized, and they're trying to extend the Boston lines into Milton and make Milton a gateway city. And we're not. I agree with Meredith and Mike Zulis that I really think we really should spend our efforts now defending that we are not a rapid transit community. I think Tim and Josh are spending an awful lot of time unnecessarily at this point in time. And I think we should spend our time shoring up our position. I think we need help from Senator Timilty and Rep. Driscoll, and we need them to work with us and their colleagues, in town, and get us reclassified. I think that's our first step. And then we can honor our obligation to, once we become an adjacent community, then we can look at the mandate and honor the law as it's written and focus on the law, not necessarily the guidelines, but focus on the law. So I think we should seriously look into getting reclassified before spending more time.
But when you say focus on the law versus the guidelines, the legislature gave DHCD the power to come up with the guidelines. So they're not saying they want the guidelines rescinded, as far as I understand. The legislature hasn't changed its position on that. I don't see how we become compliant unless Tim has some other knowledge or information that I'm not yet aware of, that DHCD's been asked to change their guidelines by the state legislature.
And then, and the last thing I was thinking, that we have some money in our budget that maybe we should, and I know time is tight, but look for using some of those funds to hire outside counsel to help us get reclassified.
Has the select board taken this up, or this is just a
So it's actually-
conversation between you and
It's going to
the
be
chair?
on their agenda. Mike can't speak for obviously for his board, so it's going to be on the agenda on Tuesday night for that board to discuss. And I really trust him and his relationships and, with DHCD that we can approach this in a way that this isn't about not wanting to be compliant. This is about wanting to be compliant, but wanting to be fair and just and really treating our trolley and recognizing that, and I know every town thinks they're unique, but this trolley to a high-speed transit is extremely unique, and it's not high-speed transit.
Yeah, I think my concern about that approach, Maggie, is that it puts us in the same 40B approach if we're not working like Meredith suggests, which is doing them tandem. Because if we're doing them tandem, we're showing good faith. If we just start with a fight and not even continue with the analysis, then we're not showing good faith. The analysis will give us more information.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we shouldn't move forward necessarily with the analysis, especially the fiscal impact analysis. I think that's critically important.
But my question even about the fiscal impact analysis is, until you do the evaluation, we talked about how many units it is, supposed new zoned units, but we also talked about how there's units already in much of this area that this would cover. So is your fiscal impact analysis based on 2,641, I think that's what it is, or is it based on the differential between that number and what already exists? So that fiscal impact analysis is only as good as the information that they're starting with.
I think
They don't have it.
RKG, reading RKG's proposal, this is not their first time. They've done it in numerous communities. They spell out exactly what their analysis and how their analysis will be done. It seemed to me that I'm not worried about their analysis being flawed. I think that's really what your concern is. When I read their proposal, I felt comfortable that the analysis made sense, how they were going to go about doing it. And it seemed to be logical and reasonable. And they also, I think, talk about how many different communities that they've served and done this for. So, and Cheryl, I'm with
For
you.
MBTA, you mean? Or,
This type of an analysis with a housing
but is it
increase.
based on what your zoning capacity is going to be? I mean, how do you know if you're trying to evaluate whether you're going to have new children or new police need, don't you need to know how many new units you're allowing?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't know until we do this analysis, is
I
my
agree with
point.
that.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but I think at this point, they have to do an analysis based on what's allowed, right? They have to do an analysis based on the
That's
maximum.
flawed then, to me.
Well, it could be reality. How is it flawed?
It has to-
It could actually happen.
That should be the maximum, but it should also be based on a zone. It's not a hypothetical when you're coming up with a zone that's going to have boundaries that already has housing. It's not that hypothetical. We don't have greenfield everywhere that we're zoning for new housing. It will not be 2,641. We know that.
I do agree with Cheryl, and this is where I do feel that we can't put the cart before the horse, because the difference in what I see, I'll use, that Granite Ave, the 2 Granite Ave parcel, and that whole, the DPW or the, it's
American Legion Hall.
Yeah.
the American Legion Hall property, those would all be new units
Right.
there. So that is very different from the zoning that we would do over 88, say
Right.
88 Wharf or Hendry's, Elliott, 138 and Elliott, which is more predictable, I would say. But I think we do need to, that's why the work that MAPC and UTL is doing to get our districts, but really know what number, because it's vastly different to zone for 2,641 versus an adjacent community, which I think is around 940 units. So that's very different. So that, I would like to try to sort of get that issue resolved as quickly as possible. So if Mike gets that on his agenda for Tuesday, their board can discuss it. This is, our town is in this, I talked to Tim, this isn't Tim's zoning, this MBTA. It's not the planning board. We're doing the legwork on it. But it's the select board's responsibility to approve all of these districts, to be part of all of this process. I think we definitely need their buy-in on what we're doing. So
I just want to read something. This is right out of their proposal. And what they wrote was, the focus of this effort will be to, number one, familiarize ourselves with the potential districts for initial tests of compliance with Section 3A, and number two, evaluate the proposed zoning for compliance with the MBTA 3A regulations and inputs to the compliance model. I think they're going to, Cheryl, utilize exactly what you're hoping they'll utilize, a model that actually can work and it's realistic.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about them getting too far ahead of the work we're getting back from MAPC and UTIL is my concern. And so my understanding was it would be based on what were the model that we agreed to move forward with.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not even close to that, because that model right now has us with far more units than were even required, right, as Tim talked about. So we wouldn't want to use that, because that would be totally flawed.
Yeah, reading their proposal, I didn't feel like they were just going to sit down and put a number of calculations together on a piece of paper and then just hand it over to us. It didn't seem like that at all. That's at least not the way. They do write in this that they're engaged with 15 other communities right now doing this. Mm-hmm. And they've done worked for 40 different communities over the years. So they're not rookies.
No, they're not.
And I'm sure that, and this is obviously somebody that Tim had to vet too. So Tim, you must feel comfortable with what they're doing, I assume.
Yeah, they actually worked for a developer that did a really huge project in South Boston that I managed when I was at BPDA. And I've seen their work in other communities. There's really only a handful of firms that do this stuff, in the Commonwealth. RKG is one of them. So it was good to get a response from them. Just always important to keep in mind when we do these things, they work for you. So, the inputs that go into whatever they're doing, come from you. So, if the compliance modeling isn't ready, then RKG is not ready. And if there are adjustments or other sort of caveats that need to be sort of, discussed and evaluated, then that's all on the table. So, we're at the very, very start of that process. So I think, they get it. They helped build the compliance model. They know the thing in and out. So they're in a really, I think, unique position to assist us with really exactly what we're looking for.
I appreciate that you consistently offer us the authority when you say they work for you. They work for us. They work for you and Josh, and they work on behalf of the planning board. I'm not spending my days managing these consultants. You guys are. So in that respect, I'm not calling up RKG and holding them accountable, or MAPC or any other consultant. So they work for us. They work for the town. They don't work for us, the members of the planning board.
And
I appreciate that, Sean. I guess what I meant is they're not going to be inputting anything into this model that hasn't been discussed. The day-to-day stuff, obviously, they're off kind of doing their thing. I just mean that, they're not, what goes into the model should not be a surprise to you, because you'll have had your hands on it. And so what comes out of it should also kind of be informed by all of that.
So to address the concern that Cheryl has, and I think this task number 3 that they call district testing, I think that's going right to the point that you'd be hoping they would be doing. Testing.
I'm trying to get to that. What meeting folder was that in?
I just went back to an email, but just scroll through that. That's.
I looked at it at the time it came in, but I don't have it committed to memory. Oops, sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think sorry.
Use the pad.
Every time.
It's Adele.
Yeah, I think you were looking at which the,
Well, his task number 3,
Number
that they
3,
refer to
district
as
testing.
district
Yeah,
testing,
okay.
that
Let me
leads me
scroll.
to believe that they're not just winging it, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, that they're going to use some data that's reasonably applicable.
You got it.
Well, it says
And I
if the
think-
chosen district do not comply, the team will identify the reasons for
Got it.
failure and options for addressing. So are they going to be looking at the model too, Tim, in terms of compliance?
Yeah, I think I took that part of their proposed scope as sort of a double check on
Double check,
kind of,
okay.
so we'll get,
All right, that's fine.
we'll get districts from MAPC and from UTIL kind of that are fine tuned, and I think, that acts as kind of a double and a triple check to make sure that that they actually do what what they say they're going to do in terms of our compliance.
Would RKG do theirs? Well, I think Tim, RKG would do theirs independent of MAPC, right?
Well, I mean, again, the proposed district boundaries, the proposed district, dimensional guidelines, ultimately come from the planning board. In terms of, we've put in some proposals, and the compliance testing that is going on right now that MAPC and UTIL are doing are basically saying these parameters either work or don't work. And then, it'll be up to this group to kind of come up with, proposals. If this height doesn't work, do we adjust it upward? Do we adjust it downward? Do we do more height somewhere else? Do we do less density somewhere else? These are all decisions that I think after the second run of the compliance model, we'll have those conversations in more depth. And then, that's, I think, what we would give to RKG in order to sort of test in terms of saying, like, here's a rough idea of what we think these districts are going to look like and what's going to be inside of them. What is a reasonable expectation for build out under these parameters? And then they sort of do their modeling from that. So it's not necessarily independent from what MAPC and UTIL are doing, but it is sort of, it's kind of a passing of the baton of the work from them to RKG.
So it's a little, I guess I didn't think of them as doing the compliance model consulting, but in reading the task here, and I thought I read through this when we got it, but in any case, it does say that they're doing the model. They're doing the work that MAPC and UTIL are doing, Tim. I guess, I mean, if it's a test or if it's additional scope because we're not going to get far enough with MAPC and UTIL, I guess it's fine. It's just I didn't realize that was part of this group's scope. It's very clear.
Well,
here that that's
I think what that element of the scope is kind of a response to is, we had a sort of a general call for, a build out analysis, which, can be interpreted a lot of different ways by a lot of different firms. And I think, and we can talk to the RKG project manager, when they come in, kind of, what the thinking behind that element of the scope was. But I think it was more kind of like, okay, let's kind of situate this task, in the world of the compliance model and then kind of the task at hand for evaluating these districts. So I think ultimately it's probably, I think it's a good thing because again, we have limited runs of the model with MAPC and UTIL. Those are sort of, grant funds that we're kind of on the verge of exhausting. And so I don't think it hurts to have additional capacity to kind of tinker with the model. So I think that's something that's, maybe not necessarily what we expected, but also probably will come in handy.
Okay.
Tim, are they able to stay on their schedule now that they have an executed contract? Because they did have a couple of tasks for June.
You're
You're muted, Tim.
I haven't had a chance to talk in depth with the project manager about it. Like I said, we just got them kind of formally under contract this afternoon.
Okay.
I think that I think it'll be fine. June is almost over, but I think, those tasks are kind of eminently doable. And kind of, again, their experience with the model itself, I think will yield dividends in that regard because, this is just something that they're very versed in. And then it'll be up to us to kind of connect them with the people that they need to be connected with and the resources and information they need to be connected with, which is going to be a high priority for us, when those asks come in.
Okay. Can I just go back to a comment that you made, Cheryl, and you, Maggie, you were commenting on it as well. I agree that we have no choice. We have 6 months to go before the year ends. We have to work on concurrent tasks. We have no choice. They've given us so little time. But I definitely agree with you, Maggie. I think, and it feels to me, and I don't know what goes on, outside of our group here, but we really should be challenging how we've been classified. And my question is, not even the selectmen, how about the town administrator? What is the town administrator doing on behalf of the town of Milton with that classification? Because I feel like, Nick Milano should be responsible for challenging a classification that we don't think is correct.
Sean, I would push back on that a little bit. Town administrator works for the select board, which is the chief executive of the town. That's the type of thing where I don't think you want the town administrator kind of going off and making those types of judgments, especially at the state level. So I do think it is appropriate for that to come from an elected board or collaboration of elected boards between the planning board and the select board. If only because, again, you're communicating with the state on behalf of the town. You don't necessarily want to sidestep the elected chief executives, in that regard. So I think this is the right path.
And what path will that be?
The path will be, the select board, again, as the sort of the elected executives of the town, what is the town's, what is the town's stance toward this? It's not just the town administrator's stance. It is, the people who are elected to represent the people of Milton. And so that's why having this discussion in open session at the select board, becomes important. The input of the planning board, will be important in that conversation. And so it's really, I mean, there's no model for this type of thing. It's not like a form that you file and say. It really is something, we have to think critically about what it is that we're saying. And I think more importantly, what it is that we're actually asking for. I've had this conversation, with Meredith. I've kind of talked about it in public meetings. I don't agree with what I think the board's position is coming to be. I do think that the Mattapan trolley functions as rapid transit. I think you get downtown quicker from Capon Street than you do from Riverside, which is rapid transit. Equally fast from Cleveland Circle, which is rapid transit. These are the things that matter, not how the train looks, not how many stops it is, like how long does it take you to get downtown, which is the really important thing. That being said, I think that, in these discussions and at these public forums, people have raised, what I think are legitimate, issues in terms of, it's a 1-seat ride from Riverside as opposed to a 2-seat ride from Capon Street or Valley Road or Milton or wherever. These are things that I think rise to the level of things that make the Mattapan trolley different from the other rapid transit lines, but not rise to the level of this is an entirely different classification. Now, that being said, this is, the opinion of your town planner, which you can do with what you want, and the select board can do with what they want, and take their own judgments into account. What I think is important to think about is, what are we asking for? Are we asking for a reduction in unit capacity? Are we asking for more time? Are we asking for other general unforeseen relief, from the guidelines? And I think the way to think about it is, especially in light of the presentation that the T gave the other day, which, some people may see that and say, we're years away from improvements to the Mattapan line. Other people may look at that and say, this project is more real than it's ever been. We're going to get a construction schedule at the end of the year. They've already committed $100+ million to the Mattapan line transformation. So you've got to think, when you go to the state and you say, we're not rapid transit, and the state comes back and says, well, then what are we doing with these hundreds of millions of dollars that we're investing in this line? You've got to make the ask commensurate with kind of the reality, which is that, the state is putting significant resources into this line to improve reliability, improve accessibility, and improve capacity. And so again, sort of the demand needs to be commensurate with what the state's contribution to these resources is. And so I think that there are, if the town is interested in making these arguments, I think that there are arguments to be made that are valid and not crazy. I think they make sense, but it's just sort of like, we think we're not rapid transit. Does the state think we're rapid transit? And what are we trying to persuade them of? And so I think that's going to be an important part of the conversation at the select board. I think, the planning board's input into that is going to be really crucial as well.
Tim, my own opinion is that line's been overlooked for decades, and it shouldn't be an argument over whether it's rapid transit or not. It's been ignored for a very, very long time by the MBTA. They should be making an investment in it regardless of this issue regarding whether it's rapid transit or not. That's my point of view.
And I have to agree with that. And I guess my concern would be, would you help the board if they came to a consensus in reclassifying the T? And would you help the board in trying to get another year or two so we can take our time and work this out?
100%.
You would.
Jim, that's what I'm here for. So like, I want to make sure that I'm being candid with you about what my professional opinion is. But as I said, I think that there are legitimate differences between the Mattapan trolley and the Green Line, which I think is the closest analog. And I think, it wouldn't be, so I'm a professional, right? And I work for the town. And so if the town administrator says, Tim, you need to help us write a letter and here's what we're doing, that's where I am. So yes, absolutely.
But if the planning board says you got to help us write a letter? No, that's okay.
I take my marching orders from the town administrator.
I get it.
I've got to be, I staff the planning board. I've got to be helpful to the planning board. So, I don't think that there's necessarily going to be a tension there. And so I think this has got to be a collaborative effort between everybody. Because, the select board represents the town's interests. The planning board are elected to be sort of the experts and the folks, that deal with the planning aspects of this. And so, I don't think it can be a question of, who's going to do what and are we going to go off in a different direction from another elected board. I really do think that there's got to be collaboration and consensus around this stuff, for everybody.
I agree.
I think that our state legislators, so Driscoll and Fluker Oakley and Timilty, they're the legislature that passed the law and put to DHCD for how to administer it. So I think they need to be a part of the conversation. And I really think it is a broader community rather than a few people who've been paying close attention and not too many who know much about it. So I think even this decision is something that needs broader awareness.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I didn't realize that this was the path that my initial comment about time and concern about people knowing about it was going to go. But one of the things I was thinking when I made that comment was to talk about a way to get people more aware of it, and it was really by kind of taking the show on the road. The suggestion I was going to make is that some neighborhood associations might have a summer gathering, or there are events like the farmers market that is every Thursday afternoon where people go. Sort of take the planning department's MBTA kind of show on the road to these places, to even if
And
it's
Tim and
not.
Josh have been doing that. I think did you go last week? Or I don't know if you went today.
We haven't been to the farmer's market yet. We're trying to go through their formal channels, through their manager, but we'll be there multiple times over the summer.
I don't want to be, and in fact, the last time I think I talked on this topic, I was complimentary of your efforts and Josh's efforts. You guys put so many hours in, trying to get to the community. But honestly, I think that is such a small number of people that we're getting to. The last, well, maybe it wasn't the last meeting. It could have been the last meeting. I know you weren't present for it. You were still away, and I had suggested, Tim, you were moving at the time, so Josh was covering that meeting. But I suggested that we have mailings that go out to every single residence in town, and I threw out the water bill, for example. We all get a water bill. Is there anything we could do to include within the water bill something that simply said, please, go to such and such a website to look at the MBTA, whatever it is, and just put it in every mailing. And, maybe you'll get somebody's attention. It could simply say, this is a very important matter for the town of Milton. It should not express a point of view.
Right.
It should just be informative, say that this is a, say that it's a, it's a very important, whatever. We can come up with something very simple and put it into every single mailing that goes out to the town. Otherwise, it's so random to try to catch people, these guys trying to catch people at a farmer's market or go to a Little League game and hopefully get their attention while they're trying to pick out the right cucumber. You know what I mean? It's, it's just too random.
Well,
and we have, how many residents do we have in the town that have, how many voters do we have in the town? I've lost track of it. It's like 10 or 12,000 voters we have in the town. How many of these guys are going to come across in the course of the summer? It's a great attempt, but I think given the short time frame that we have to come up with something that's more efficient and more successful, getting to the masses, because, at the end of the day, we're trying awful hard. How many people do you get to one of the presentations? The one I was at the Council on Aging, what do you think we had? Cheryl, we had 40, 50 people there? Maybe? And you bring up a really good point. Are we getting the same people at each one of them? Maybe we get 10 or 15 new ones.
I've been at this a bit, in terms of even when we did the master plan and working with the consultant, and the planning board at that time selected, even before my time, selected a consultant based on a public engagement plan that consultant had prepared. And it's just really hard. But if you have, it's not one or the other, it's one and. I mean, you have to have all different approaches. And the thing that I've seen consistently across things that I've read on public engagement is to go where people are instead of expecting them to come to you. So instead of expecting them to come to a forum, go to something that they're already hosting. So that's why I said, some of the suggestions, like with neighborhood associations, if they already are meeting, or if they, that when there's a project being proposed in a neighborhood, they convene a meeting. So if you say, this is the largest zoning initiative the town has seen since 1938, when the initial zoning was passed, and we want your neighborhood we'd like to come to your neighborhood association and make sure that your neighbors are informed, then those folks who are involved will go around to their neighbors and knock on doors. That's what some neighborhoods have done. I think it needs the same urgency as it is when somebody's concerned about a project in their neighborhood. And the other thing is that I've read about these engagement is like setting up a little storefront and say, like, you can pop in anytime, and you may not. Mm-hmm. So any one of those things. I mean, you could even go to houses of worship and ask to be in their newsletter if they have one, or an email blast if they have one. I don't disagree with you about a mailing, though.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
And I have a thought on a mailing, but I have an example based on an experience that, I was part of. This development at 648 and 652, for as tremendously large as that was, the number of people that knew about that live very near it, was that big.
Oh, I know.
That big. So again, now this is something that was going to happen directly in a neighborhood, and still, you couldn't get people's attention to it. You just couldn't. So I think I appreciate it. I think there's, it's like anything else. It's any big problem. There are multiple ways to attack it, to try to solve it. But there's one area of the town that I think has a concentration of residents that will be affected by it, and we continue to talk about it. It is the Elliott Street corridor. Why not send a mailing to the people that are within that area? Put a mailing out to that group of people. They are the ones that are absolutely going to be affected by it.
Well, I think
Sean, we hear that, and actually following your last, the comments on this topic at the last meeting, we've got an initial print out for 200 postcards giving basic facts. I don't know if anyone took one from the presentation last Thursday, but we haven't yet decided on how we'll distribute those. I know you all brought up both water bills and school mailers, geographically locating them at Elliott Street. So we have hundreds of postcards ready to go out. So we heard that feedback.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll talk to, it's not unprecedented to put things in a tax bill or a water bill. It's a bigger undertaking than printing out a couple hundred postcards and handing them out. But we can talk to folks in town and see like what the logistics of that sort of thing would be. Sean, I don't disagree that I'll give you a sort of analogous example. When we did the bike plan, a lot of the engagement that we got on our survey was driven by the fact that we got into all of the school principals, weekly email newsletters, which is a little bit smaller potatoes than every house in town, but it just goes to show that like there are communication channels that get many, many, many more people than town social media and kind of, other kind of means. And it's the schools and it's the other sort of things. The concern becomes, you want to be judicious about piggybacking off of someone else's mail. You got to talk to the town treasurer and kind of see like, are you cool with this or DPW and the water bill? But I think, it's not unprecedented. It's obviously, possible. It's just, what are the resources that are necessary to do that? So we'll continue to explore that. I think it's a fine idea. I think it'll definitely boost the message, and then that's what we're interested in. So, we'll continue to pursue that.
Thank you.
So wouldn't the DP, if it was in the water bill, I don't know if it goes through the DPW or not, but that is, Nick Milano would reach out to the department head and basically say, put this in your mailing, I would think. Isn't that how it would go? Or you reach out to the dog officer and it goes into their dog licensing. Just say, here, this is your flyer, put it in your mailing.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for the town administrator in terms of what his authority would be or what his preference would be. But that's that's my first stop, is to talk to him and see what are the logistics of this. Who do we need to get around the table to make sure that this is something that's doable and appropriate to do. And then we can go from there. But I think it's more of a logistical thing, and then a kind of walking through, okay, we put in something for MBTA communities, who's going to be the next group or kind of issue that wants to put something in the water bill, which is it's a question that I can imagine, folks having. So I just think, gaming out what those, what those downstream effects might be, is going to be a conversation that folks are going to want to have. I mean, I think the contention is this is the biggest zoning thing the town has done since 1938 and warrants, all hands on deck in terms of getting the message out. So I think there's a strong argument to be made that this is something that we should do. It's just again a logistical question. So we'll get that ball rolling.
So one thing I would suggest is a lot of people don't really even know what the term zoning means and why they should care about it. I know it's something that we're all just use as any other common word, but again, during the campaign season, I was talking with some folks, and some folks, I would say, you may wonder why you don't have a coffee shop near you on the west end of town, like we've heard, right? So, but zoning is why. So, if you put things in terms that people can understand, that's just an example that, because that's what people are asking about. But this, you'd want to frame it such that you draw somebody's attention in, not just, have you heard about MBTA communities and what it is? But, you know, if we think about what that message is, have you heard that the state has a housing shortage and that the state legislature's solution was to pass a law requiring communities such as Milton to zone for more multifamily housing, or just something, you know, that draws people's attention in? And did you know that we have until the end of this year to become compliant or to stay compliant with this law? I don't know, I'm just throwing out, this isn't
No, get
necessarily the
people's
language,
attention.
but something to get
people need-
people's
Or
attention.
something like,
big.
why did you choose Milton for single-family zoning?
But that's, you know, that comes with a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Because that can sound like you want to be exclusive and exclude. So you want to just have this be more, I think.
This is
fact-
awareness. I think
They
it's-
both can. If
Yeah.
you say, do you know we have a housing shortage, you know, that.
Well, if the state has
I
identified
understand.
a housing shortage, okay?
There's no doubt
It's the
about
state.
it. There's no doubt about it. I get it. But, you know, I think that what you want is to get people's attention, but we don't want to condition anybody's thought. We want
That's true, yeah.
We want people to develop their own thoughts, have their own opinions. I don't want to be part of conditioning people I just want them to know the facts. You know, here's what this means.
Right, so that's
Decide
why
what
the
you like.
state, the reason they passed the law was because they had identified a need for additional housing.
Right.
In order for the state to remain competitive economically for job growth. That's not me making a judgment, it's what they've said the reason is that they passed the law.
I understand, but I think that one of the challenges we have is people jump to conclusions. There are a lot of people that think that this housing is going to be affordable housing. This is not affordable housing. This is market rate housing, you know, and we can create whatever zoning we want to make a percentage of it, but there are conclusions that people jump to. You know, I'm also a believer that if this ever passes and we adopt it, it's going to be development that will be a trickle. And when housing comes to Milton in a trickle, you know, the price of housing is not low. It stays high. You know, you would need a surge of housing to come to Milton to bring the price down. But, you know, you look at the units as they come online in Milton. They never come online, you know, and all of a sudden bring the numbers down to something that's possible for your kids or my kids to buy. Do you know what I mean?
Well, part of it is that because it's all of a certain kind of housing stock, that is single family on a fairly decent sized lot, that sets the price point versus
well, look at the-
Just look at
multifamily.
Henry's.
Yep.
Henry's isn't that.
Those are large units too, though. Those are over 1,300 square foot units.
I don't think whether it's 1,300, 2,300 that, you know, we're going to see what everybody hopes, that we're all of a sudden going to have something
Henry's are
that's
very
more
small.
affordable. I'm sorry? You're a real estate person.
I
I'm
said
just a
Henry's are
builder.
very small. A lot of people, it doesn't work because they're too small, actually. But
Yeah, I mean.
But I think that's a point of view that I feel very strongly about. It's either going to be an overwhelming development that's going to bring disruption to the town and a lot of units at one time, which no one is going to be happy about, or it's going to be slow and gradual, and we're not going to see the price reduction that everybody would hope for. So,
I'm not an economist, but it's supply and demand is what I hear economists say all the time. And so that everything I've read about why there's such a worry about housing availability, and just in pure numbers point of view, has to do with the competitiveness of the state to attract talent, to retain talent, and for the regional economy to remain strong. So to me, that underlying concern and economic, I've read, so the biggest impediment has been production of housing, and what's been identified as impediment to the production is zoning. So that's why it went to that. I mean, this is, again, what I've read. I'm not the expert. Whether this zoning will solve the problem, if everyone implements it, I can't judge.
Yeah.
But
what can I? And regionally and everything I've read, I agree with you 100%. However, the supply and demand, the supply's never been high enough in Milton. You know, it's never been high enough for the pricing to come down. The supply that becomes available, you know, homes are bought up so fast that there's never enough quantity of housing that the pricing gets pushed down. And you've been here for a long time. I mean, you've seen it too, you know, and you're in real estate. This is
And
your
we
thing.
could discuss, we could go on and
Okay.
discuss this all night. But we do have actually someone in the audience, and I just want to give time for public, any public comments and questions. So please feel free to join us. And if you could just state your name and your address for the record, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackson Humphreys, 34 Hoy Terrace.
Welcome.
So first off, I'd like to thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me speak tonight.
Yes.
And secondly, to our town planning department who organized the forum that I attended last week. I thought it was, you know, it's just nice to see public engagement. And I definitely learned a lot at that meeting. This next 6 months will be the most important and consequential 6 months that this planning board has seen since 1938. No matter how long you guys decide to be on this board, you know, these next 6 months and this summer, it is, you know, the most consequential decisions for this town will be made with regard to zoning in almost 100 years. Think about that. So, that being said, you know, I've done a lot of research on this topic, and I believe that because of, you know, this is an issue of such importance that all options really need to be on the table. And I believe that reclassification needs to be front and center. I think it's an honest conversation that we need to have, right? I think we can be working in good faith, you know, towards compliance and modeling. But I also think, you know, you as a board have an obligation, and I would say this to the select board, to look at what are all the options. Everything needs to be on the table. So the first document that I want to draw your attention to is a document that was prepared in 2012 by the MAPC, entitled Growing Station Areas, the Variety and Potential of Transit-Oriented Development in Metro Boston. Okay? In this document from 2012, they did not classify Milton as a rapid transit area. They actually classified us as what was called a trolley suburb. So they found cause in 2012 to distinguish us from a rapid transit community. Now the variables have not changed. The lines are the same, but they found a reason to classify us differently. So that should start causing alarms. Why are they, you know, why is the MAPC, an authority on this subject, you know, saying that we should be, you know, that we should be looked at differently than many of the other communities now that we are grouped with under the current Section 3A guidelines. I'm going to quote from this document, page 13. Our analysis of transportation metrics also indicates those station areas where new development near transit might not fully achieve the desired benefits, trolley suburbs. On page 17, while the trolley suburb stations are the only type that might exceed the estimated transit-oriented development potential by 2035, so there is a potential at the time, in 2011, the low transit commute share and the high VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, around these stations means that this development might not necessarily generate the sustainable transportation patterns that are a key goal of transit-oriented development. So after I read this document, I said, interesting, so they're distinguishing us as they're classifying us as a trolley suburb. Now, they had the opportunity to classify us as rapid transit, and they chose not to. There were plenty of communities that they designated rapid transit, but they decided not to. I underwent a review of scholarly articles in, you know, published academic journals on transit density. There are several determinants and variables of rapid transit that we look at when we're talking about land use and transportation corridors. Headways between cars has been mentioned. I have never heard that. the big two variables that we need to be looking at when we're talking about is Milton rapid transit is number one, distance to central business district. So that's time. How long does it take for me to get, from any of the stations in our area to the downtown area, and ridership. Now, this is scholarly academic work. Ridership, we're nowhere near that. Okay, the case has been made. But distance to central business district. So a 1996 report by the Transit Cooperative Research Program found that, quote, for light rail boardings decreased within distance from this central business district. So basically, the farther away you get, when we're talking about light rail, the farther out you get in time from your central business district, the less people there will actually be boarding. So we talk about how, development guides ridership, right? And that the reason why a lot of people aren't riding at these stations is because, they're very low units per acre. But let's look at the distance from your central business district. I mean, that is a huge driving factor behind rapid transit. There are, at some times, it is faster to take a commuter rail from Milton than it is to take a rapid transit. So, it's arguable if light rail buildup, even if you build the MBTA refurbishment of that line, whether or not that will actually be rapid transit. Look at distance from central business district. This is what the scholarship that I have reviewed, it is one of the major significant variables. So 15 units per acre is absolutely arbitrary. There's absolutely no scholarly consensus on the cost effectiveness threshold for light rail systems. Okay, there's massive variation across every district, community, city that I have looked at. Transit supportive densities are all over the place. So, as a simple rule of thumb, coming up with an arbitrary threshold is extremely difficult, especially when you're looking at a community like Milton, where our profile, our zoning profile, and the profile of our community is so absolutely unique. It's extremely difficult to come up with a number like 15 and say, we have the solution. This is what's going to, this is what's going to populate your refurbished line. So, as I said, reclassification should absolutely be in the picture. We're not saying we don't want to comply with the law. You might support the law and say, there's absolutely merit in building more units in town. There's a housing shortage in Massachusetts. We need more affordable housing. We need more time. As I said in my comment at the meeting last week, I do not believe that this should be rushed. I do not believe that this should be, we have one meeting after the zoning is drafted, you have a 2-hour warrant committee meeting, and this goes to prime time in December at town meeting. That would be a shame. So I believe there is a scenario in which we can say to the state, we're going to not comply with this legislation in good faith. We understand the merit of what's trying to be done, but we simply need more time. And I believe that they would understand that. And I believe that our planning department has taken steps. This board has taken steps. The select board has taken steps to demonstrate that there is an interest in complying with this law in some way. But we need to be open, have discussions, and really look at the facts. One issue that I wanted to bring up that's a little separate is the issue of 50% of your district needs to be in the transit area. And this gets at sort of the arbitrary nature of these guidelines. And it's a bit comical when you read it, when you realize that Milton's developable area is at 404 acres. And if you're at 400 acres, you get down to 40% in your district. So my message to the planning department and this board is, you know, given that there's a difference there of, you know, 4 acres, is there any way we can look at that and say, you know, there's 4 acres that they missed. There's 4 acres that should be off the table that's not developable, or we can get that threshold down to 40%. We need to be creative here in how we address this problem. So I believe, to summarize my remarks, that this board should work collaboratively with the select board to petition, please reclassify us. We have been erroneously classified in, you know, this, it does not make any sense. And if you look at the numbers, it doesn't add up. So community engagement is important. You know, I support the letter idea. I mean, you could go to Sue Galvin tomorrow and get a list of everyone within the, you know, transit area district. I mean, that would be simple to do. This board has funds, send out a letter, you know? And then I think this board also has the authority to send a letter to, you know, the purveyors of the guidelines. So I appreciate the time, and I'll be back. So,
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
That was very
Well
Yes,
done.
thank you.
excellent. Are we seeing any other hands up online? Anyone seeing?
No hands on the Zoom.
No hands raised. Okay, great. Well, thank you. Well, this was a really good, robust discussion, and I think it's, you know, hopefully we'll bring some more awareness to the community on really what this is and how big and the impact that this could make on the community. So
Should we have a joint meeting with the select board at some point?
I don't know that that's necessary. I think that for now that they can, you know, explore, you know, to have this discussion. That was eloquent, Jackson. I don't know if you would like to go on Tuesday evening and speak with them. But if they're in favor of this, I don't.
I guess the
They're in
reason,
favor?
At some point, maybe on this, on the MBTA.
I'm talking
once we're
about on the
further along.
MBTA in general. I had a conversation with the chair of the select board probably a month ago, and I said, have you had sort of regular updates as the planning board has on status of the analysis and so forth? And he had indicated that they hadn't. And you know, they can get their own independent updates from Tim. But it might be useful if we want, in the spirit of working collaboratively, to all have the same information and hear one another's 10 people's voices about the particular topic. And the other thing I would say is that the select board may get a different audience watching than the planning board gets. So it may broaden the number of people who hear it. You know, it's one of the things that I've thought about a lot over my time on the board is that planning board works on zoning and it goes to town meeting, and the select board, and it might be something that's really important overall to the town. Let's just say, you know, a district like East Milton Square, for example. It's not just a planning board or town meeting or warrant committee. It's a whole of town, right? And so the highest level of elected officials, being the select board, ought to be, you know, as up to speed and engaged in these
I think
initiatives,
these select
right?
board members should be attending all of these MBTA meetings. We're not doing this for, you know, just for our planning board. We're doing this for the community. So my expectation is that if select board members cannot go, that they are watching it virtually, that they are participating in and seeing the work that Tim and Josh are doing. So
watching that, I agree with you, watching the forums, but having
think
a
that's really important.
conversation, I frankly think it would be better to have a conversation amongst boards than just a conversation amongst chairs, no disrespect to the two chairs, but it's a fuller representation of both elected bodies that way. So it doesn't have to be, obviously, we can think about how frequent that might need to be, but we're only 6 months away from the end of the year. So even if we had 2 of these meetings, you know, we did have joint meetings in Milton Village. We wanted to make sure that people were up to speed. So that's just a suggestion.
Well, I think until we have our models finished, we don't know what, we're looking at our districts. We need to identify how we're classified. And those two things don't require a meeting. I think it's simple facts and, how we approach it. But certainly this is collaborative. And, once we have the district sort of mapped out and the modeling done, absolutely this, it should be discussed as well. So.
Well, I guess the
Yeah.
district, sorry, just one last thing on the district. We haven't taken a vote on challenging a district. And so if your representation to the chair of the select board is that the planning board has a certain position, then we need to take a vote. And we need to advertise that kind of a vote. So,
We did discuss, I'm sorry, that was the meeting. You weren't here at the meeting, but everyone felt that it's worth going
And so you took a vote to authorize you to speak to the chair of the select board
Correct.
to request that?
yes.
All right, I didn't see that in the minutes, but I'll watch
I
the
don't know if it was
tape.
a formal vote, but it was certainly asking permission, because I felt that was important, so.
That then should be reflected in the minutes again, I haven't had a chance to watch the tape yet. I did read the minutes, I didn't see that in the minutes.
We didn't take a vote, but I think it was just generally understood and supported that Meredith, our chair, should talk to the chair of the select board.
And the board can discuss it, but I think there's a lot of reasons why we should be given more time, and we should be considered. What you just read from MAPC, we're a trolley town. We're not a high-speed transit town.
But do you think we need a vote to, would it be better if we took a vote to tell the selectmen that we are in
certainly
support
could.
or not support of
Pursuing
asking
reclassification?
Tim and Nick Milano to pursue a reclassification? So I think a formal vote might send a strong message of our position about getting reclassified.
Yeah, and to explore it.
Yeah, I think
would be fine.
with Cheryl present, now it's a chance
Yeah,
for us to have a formal vote. So, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. We should.
So I'd like to make a motion to take a vote to see if we want to send or allow Tim and Nick Milano to formally engage in a letter to get us reclassified.
So, I'm sorry, is there a second?
Is there a second to supporting that? In my meeting with Mike again to support the position of the board.
That's where I
Whatever
thought
that
it was
is.
going. The motion was to allow you to discuss it.
Authorize me to go and
Talk to the
express,
chair of the select board to, I guess, voice
to
our opinion.
request a reclassification status.
Right.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be stronger if we took a vote,
Yes.
saying that we want to be either reclassified?
Correct, but we need to
Okay.
work through the select board to actually
I don't think we should
make that
specifically say
initiative.
Nick Milano and Tim do it
Okay.
as of yet, because I don't know the protocol.
Yeah, okay.
That we would support the reclassification. Why don't we keep that simple?
Yes. And maybe an extension of
or-
time as well.
And the
Can we just
extension of time, which would be part of
ask
all of
for an
that.
extra year. Just look, can we
Yeah.
just have more time on this?
So maybe we need to make that simpler.
So simpler, yes. So would someone like to make that motion?
Maggie?
No,
Or Sean, would you like?
So,
to
Or
make a
whoever, it doesn't
motion.
matter.
Yeah, I would like to make the motion then to, a motion by vote of the planning board that we pursue reclassification for the town of Milton. By whatever avenue Tim feels that we need to. Whether that be through the select board or to Nick Milano, but
Appropriate channels, okay.
Appropriate.
Is there a second to that?
A second.
Okay. All in favor?
aye.
Can we have discussion
wanna-
before we vote?
Discussion? Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah,
My concern about being the first communication from Milton is it sets the wrong message, being our first communication.
It's not the first.
That's all, yeah.
We submitted and said that we were moving forward, right, at the beginning of the year.
Right, and we're now saying we really didn't mean that, because we haven't even come close to finishing our analysis, and we're ready to say that that's the wrong thing for us. Your classification is wrong, and our plan was wrong. I just...
Can I suggest something to your point? I understand what your concern is. We have engaged consultants, to help us. We only have 6 months between now and when we have to make a decision. I think we could say that while we are, moving forward with the engagement of MAPC, UTIL, RKG, we also respectfully request that we, get
My
consideration.
other concern is we haven't even asked how they arrived at that classification for us. What's their logic behind it? Is it a time extension? Could we seek a time extension before, and so that we finish our analysis before we make make that first request be changing classification? Because this is what I expressed earlier. So I'm going to be a no vote on this because I think it sends the wrong message. It's not that I don't think, I have a grave concern. That's not grave. I have concerns about the total number, but until we finish the analysis, I'm not ready to say that we should immediately ask for a different classification, because that puts Milton out of the 12 rapid transit communities and all of the others asking for special treatment again. And that's what got us into trouble on 40B.
You regard it as special treatment. I regard it as appropriate treatment. We had a speaker here who presented something that was developed in 2012, not 1992 or 1980, only 10 years ago. And Julia, if it's possible, could you distribute that? If Jackson would be kind enough to send that to staff, could you send that out to us? But I mean, it's only 10 years ago, Cheryl, that they had defined us as what was the expression? A trolley town.
Yeah, I guess what I would say, that
It's a parallel. It's not.
it's not what is
It's
that
not
motion
not
is
wanting
not
to be-
parallel. That
no.
motion was immediately to send this message
for
to the state.
reclassification. But in
So
the
it's not the same as parallel. If it said,
We're working-
your motion
yeah.
is we are working on parallel tracks to analyze how Milton can comply with a rapid transit community in the time frame that we're doing. We have concerns about the time frame, and we have concerns about the classification. We would like to ask you how you came to put Milton in with these other communities, because we feel as if it might be a misclassification. But we would like to engage in discussion with you about it. That's a different
Cheryl.
different approach than saying we immediately want you to say we're at the wrong classification and you need to change it.
Cheryl, we're not writing the letter here. I simply made a motion for Tim to pursue it. He's a professional, as he said earlier, as is Nick Milano, and I'm sure they're going to write something that's going to, present Milton in the best light while they ask for it. I don't think we're
Absolutely.
charged with writing the letter here. We're just asking that we pursue it. And Tim's a very capable leader. And I'm sure he'll write it in a way that will represent Milton in the appropriate light. And if you want me to rephrase and restate what I'd like to vote on, I don't mind saying that if that's what we want to say.
because we agree. I agree with what you're saying.
So the
Yeah.
motion isn't what I said I would support. So if you want to reframe your motion, I'll reconsider how I might vote, because I think we will be viewed in much better light if we show our
Correct.
a best effort at compliance.
Absolutely.
So the motion was to make a motion to take a vote that we pursue reclassification through appropriate channels.
And would you like to add to that with the understanding?
Well,
You could add to that. Would you like to add to that? So we are clarifying that we are working to be compliant.
While still working on our compliance models, or?
I guess it's, your emphasis is on asking for the reclassification. And what I suggested is a focus on we're pursuing compliance, and we're concerned about time, and we're concerned about classification. And we would like to discuss classification. So that's different than asking for a reclassification, and that's a different motion.
We'd like to discuss,
I'm just
yeah.
like, I'm putting out there that I'm not supportive of it in the limited scope and wording that you put forth in the motion.
Let me make a suggestion. We're 2 weeks out to our next meeting, right? Am I right? Our next planning board meeting is 2 weeks. Why don't we give Tim a chance to try to gather some information on how they arrived at classification, right? Instead of just taking the position that you said that we don't agree with the classification. We don't have to vote today, for this. We can let Tim and the team do some work to try to figure out from their determination, tell us how you arrived at it, and we'll be, and maybe Tim can think a little bit about how we would. He did say earlier if we requested that Tim pursue this, he would pursue it. So let's give Tim a couple of weeks to think about how we could strategically make that request, and then we'll come back to our next planning board meeting. We'll discuss it as a group, and at that point in time, potentially we make a motion, and potentially we vote.
Yeah, does that seem fair?
I thought it was also the selectmen are meeting on Tuesday,
Right.
and they're discussing this. So we're not aware if any of the selectmen are watching our meetings or attending the forums. So I thought that this motion was really only to ask their board at their meeting to pursue,
To support.
support our request of pursuing a reclassification. And then they can form a letter, write a letter, then it would come to us to review, to make sure all of Cheryl's concerns are addressed. And then it can go to them, and they can send it off.
Yeah, so that's still the classification is the first step in that. So that's
All right, so you know what, at this point, Tim and Mike and I were going to have a conversation just on the best way to proceed with this, and get Tim's, thoughts on this. Mike wants to get a sense of the board, and we can share, our discussions tonight. But it's the intent is to fully be compliant, but to understand how and why we were classified this way. How can we be given the time, because this is too important. And so it's opened the door for the conversation for the select board to have on their own too. So I don't know that we have to have a vote, but I thought what you were saying is you wanted a vote to support me speaking to Mike. And
well, I guess I understood there's different things, and maybe you could just clarify. My understanding was that you all agreed that you were going to ask Mike to basically ask for that change in designation. So,
tell him
I
that
thought,
we were interested in that classification, and for him to speak to his board, because we're in this together, and we're not trying to do this,
And so when I said that, was there a vote, because I think I wanted to have this. Sorry.
Did you
I was
want to
traveling
vote?
last
Oh, yeah.
time. But, and so, but what I think, if you all agree with Sean, which is, thank you, Sean, for considering my concerns, is allow for them to have their discussion on Tuesday, see where they are, but not have it be a formal request of the board yet. Have it be something where the board has voiced this concern, but recognizes that the approach to this is important.
And time is of the essence. I do feel that we can't.
But I mean, approach meaning, like how you go about with an ask. What's your first step in this initiative? Should be to understand, at least in my mind, understand how it got there. And is there any flexibility in changing it before you go immediately to ask for it to be rescinded or changed? So it's how you approach the concern. And so that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I wanted to understand exactly what you had formulated and been authorized to do on behalf of the board.
Yep, so this is only a conversation right now that's happening. So why don't we just table the vote for now? Let's, when
So withdraw the motion.
withdraw the motion
And
for now.
Rashawn
I said,
will-
Withdraw the motion.
Yeah.
Tim can do some exploration, that would be part of our conversation. Tim? Does this
So my
make sense
concern
Yeah.
is
for
just
you?
it's from a timing perspective.
Yeah.
People's vacations are coming up. The summer, like our vacations,
Mm-hmm.
or people are not going to be here, probably. So I just don't want to waste time, because time is of the essence. I also just want to make sure that we're not, I talk to a lot of people every day about this. So I feel that all my outreach that I do every day is I'm hearing from the average resident that they think we should be reclassified. So I'm pretty confident in my perspective for dealing with the residents of the town. And so that's why I feel comfortable saying that the residents of the town want us to pursue being reclassified.
And we did hear it at the forum that I attended, and I'm hearing it from residents too. And I'm trying to bring that information because I think people are thinking the planning board's working on this. And so maybe the select board isn't hearing this as directly, but I'm hearing the same thing from the people who I talk to. So that's why I had been thinking this, for a while, and it really, I think it's worth having that conversation, and I'm grateful that Tim has agreed to,
Yeah, so I mean, we talked earlier about how not very many people even know about this, and I guess, what information they understand is coming from individuals, and how well each individual understands that this is still, I'm still waiting to fully understand what it means for Milton until we do all this compliance model. So if I talk to someone about it, I say, my opinions are still able to be formed because I'm waiting for the analysis. I need the analysis to have a fully informed decision about any of it. So I'm concerned about prejudging something before we do the analysis. And that's been my consistent message. I was asked about this during the campaign too, and my answer was that, we have to understand what this would mean for Milton. Is it possible for us to comply in a way that keeps Milton in a character that people desire the way it's been, but also accommodates additional housing because, there's a need for additional housing, not just from the state's point of view, but from the town's point of view. I mean, there's very little housing available. People who want to downsize can't. People who want to move back to the community that they grew up in can't. So, we owe it to a lot of different people to really do the work, to do, to do the analysis before we form a final decision.
but you can't do an analysis until you know what your numbers are that
you
you're
could say,
being required and being asked to do. And this goes back to the definition of high
we
transit.
know what we're being asked to. We may say that doesn't work, and that was the reason.
There was a lot of changes with DHCD with their guidelines. They were originally putting buses in the commuter category. I can't remember exactly, but when we first started talking about this, Arlington was considered, I believe, a commuter community, and now they got reclassified. This has been evolving, and this has not been anything that's in stone from the beginning. It's been sort of fairly fluid, and I think Tim is doing his best to try to follow the fluidity of all of this because things have been changing. And
but after this last set of design guidelines, have they changed, Tim? They had initial round.
So there've been adjustments. There was an adjustment to the guidelines regarding housing affordability. The original final guidelines were a little bit more strict in terms of what the allowable requirements for affordable housing were. They issued an adjustment that basically created space for towns to increase a potential inclusionary requirement if they could provide a sort of a financial feasibility analysis that said that if you wanted to do 15% over 10%, it would be financially feasible. The concern about affordable housing being, you had towns that set a 33% inclusionary requirement that's a de facto sort of ban on multifamily housing because no one's actually going to be able to reach that percentage. So there have been adjustments to the guidelines. Nothing's come out. I've heard, third and fourth hand that there may be some adjustments to the guidelines regarding, the prohibition on mandating mixed use or ground floor commercial. That's based primarily on concerns that town of Brookline has raised. Nothing official has come out, so it's not it's not inconceivable that the guidelines could be adjusted. It's precisely why they're guidelines and not regulations. In order sort of for the state to have the discretion to get relief. I think the issue and the difference between those examples and what we're talking about is, a lot of communities raise concerns about, the affordability requirements. A lot of communities raise concerns about the mixed use kind of prohibition of mandating that. This would be a situation where I don't know if there are any other towns that are, disputing their classification as a rapid transit community. Which again is not to say that there aren't potentially arguments to be made in favor of that argument. I think it more becomes a question of, again, okay, you don't think you're a rapid transit community, so what? And then kind of what do you respond with that? I think, to get back to I think Maggie's point about, we don't want to waste time. I don't think, I think that continuing to pursue the analysis of what our zoning districts will look like under, the current guidelines is still necessary. In the board's eyes, in the worst case scenario that we write to the state and the state says, go fly a kite, you're still a rapid transit community, we will still be doing the work towards compliance. And then, in the best case scenario, there is some relief granted in whatever form, the town is interested in. We have a base from which we can start to either, cut geography or cut units or take some more time to do more analysis if that's the relief that we get. So, pursuing this and whenever if and when we get around to writing a letter, we will still have been, doing the analysis, doing the compliance testing, and then also gathering the information about, how did this classification come about? What is the history of thinking about Milton and other towns and their sort of, transit kind of capacity, and sort of just marshaling those arguments, together. Because I think, one way to think about this is, rather than, the board and then the select board, in collaboration, are going to do whatever you all decide to do. But one way I think about this is, given the history of how the guidelines have been navigated so far, it's not inconceivable that, we reach the end of the road of compliance testing and figure out, look, it's not going to be tolerable to fully comply with these guidelines. We're going to need some relief somewhere in terms of the size of a sub-district or the location of a district, or maybe a little bit more than 50% of our district is outside the transit area or something, that we really can't, foresee right now. And, you ask for that relief when you know that you need it. I think we all, we all feel and understand that we're on a really tight schedule. And I don't think we don't have a choice but to stay on that tight schedule, because the worst case scenario is they don't give us any relief and we're still on the hook for December 31. So I think thinking in terms of other forms of relief, maybe worthwhile. I'm sorry, I went off on a couple little tangents there, but long story short, the guidelines have been malleable, and it just becomes, what is your persuasive argument that they should be further kind of adjusted?
Well, I think you make a good point in terms of if you have an approach where you think you might ask for relief in the implementation, if you go about the approach of asking for the reclassification in a way that isn't so finite or so definitive, it puts you in a better position in the second piece if you want to ask for some relief there. It's like the 40B piece, right? Where Milton didn't try and do any friendly 40Bs, so we just get whack-a-moled, and they deny every appeal to them because we didn't try anything on our own before, or even any zoning to allow for. It's the same idea could be applied here. If you're going to show that you haven't completed your analysis, but you're already asking for a reclassification, let's say that gets denied, then are you less likely to get some relief in the implementation when you get to those details?
See, I would think they would say, what took you so long to ask for a reclassification? Where have you been?
And they probably should.
I just
Well,
disagree with that,
what's
yeah.
so, where
I
have
just
you
like
been?
you don't
you
have
know?
without the analysis, what's the justification? Milton
Because
is
of
different
Because
than
it
every
doesn't
other
have
town.
anything to do with an analysis. It's just a definition of transit.
It's arbitrary.
Yeah,
It's a very
right.
arbitrary.
It has nothing really to do with the analysis. We are really going after how come they classified us in rapid transit. That's it. We want an outline.
Well, asking for that I support. Asking for rescinding without first asking for that, I don't support.
Well, if you go back to
Or
where I
changing.
was, I said, let's take 2 weeks. Let's
Yeah.
give Tim a chance to ask some questions, to request the criteria. They have to have criteria that they use, or they
Exactly.
should have criteria that they use. They may not have had criteria that they use. They may just have decided, because they wanted to decide to call us that. So I still think 2 weeks is not a long period of time, and we'll make a better decision. We'll be more patient. We'll be more deliberate. We'll have better information when we decide to do that. And if you have a conversation with the select board chair, just to make sure they're having conversations about this in their meetings, I think that'd be helpful. They should be encouraged, to at least be talking about it. I agree they probably want some information, but, I had sent a note to the select board as a resident in January. I had sent a note to the select board members and to the town administrator. So, I put it on their radar around the 22nd of January. So I would like to think that they all understand that this is a really significant issue.
Have they responded to you?
Nope. Nope.
So we're all in agreement, like this is the approach,
That's
and
a
this was the
shame.
first, when I discussed it with Tim, that is absolutely the approach, to demonstrate all of the things that we are doing to move forward and be compliant. That is, I said, that is first and foremost that we have to,
Yeah, and I
we
think
have to
any,
approach
right,
it that
and
way.
I think any
Yeah.
letter might start with that, that
Certainly,
they took
certainly.
advantage of every grant program available first, right
Yeah.
as soon as available.
Yeah.
We've had it on an agenda at every meeting, all of those things. So to show good faith right off the bat, and then you say, however, or I don't know if the however, but but we do have a concern about this classification because, anyway, we've talked about that's the.
Well, maybe we should be
Okay.
more involved in drafting the letter. Have
Well,
Tim write it,
let's
and
do the
then-
analysis,
then we edit
as
it.
Sean said.
Okay.
All right, I think we're good to move on. from
Just quick for
yeah,
Tim. Have you
sorry.
been briefing the select board, Tim? Regularly or once or?
So I was required to brief the select board at the very outset of the process when the first guidelines came out. And I have been to the select board a few times since then. We've been discussing having a more regular briefing schedule. Obviously want to make sure that, I'm not just going there for the sake of going there, but kind of keeping a little bit more in the loop on a regular schedule. So I was at their meeting maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, with the briefing. It was kind of after our last public forum, so I was able to report on that a little bit. And we'll try to get back on a future agenda that they have on that. But yes, they have asked for more regular briefings. It's just a matter of kind of fitting into their schedule.
And I watched your briefing, and I feel like their discussion was, they're throwing it on the planning board. That's kind of what I got out of that meeting.
Well, they probably want to see us do the initial work to see what what we're looking at, but
Yeah, this is a different topic. Everything we're doing with the consultants is what we should be doing with the consultants. It's our duty, it's our board, that's what we should be doing. This discussion of requesting a reclassification there has to be combined support for that, so it's different. You know, if they expect us to be doing what we're doing, they should. It's our job. That other piece of business of requesting reclassification requires, it will require everybody. It'll require us, it'll require the town administrator, it'll require the select board, so.
Yep.
You know, but I do think they should understand that this is what we're feeling. You know, we're feeling that. They should understand that, so they have time to think about it and
Right.
process it.
Right, exactly. Terrific. So Tim, we'll finalize our discussion on that. So maybe, you know, it'll give Mike some information to bring to the meeting, or if you could, you know, possibly go and answer questions too. That might be good too.
Yep.
All right, good. Well, I think it's 9:30, so if there's not anything else, I think we should move on, because there's a couple of things that I thought this would be a good evening, since we don't have a public hearing, to get a sort of an initial discussion on the lighting. We had so these are more housekeeping things, but we had a lighting article that was brought to the planning board that the select board had worked on, and had a number of, I think almost 600 signatures on that supporting it. I don't know if the members, I thought we would be starting this earlier, and could sort of go through what they had presented to us, and consider whether this is something that we want to work from, or if it's something that we would like to look at what other communities have done. I had asked Josh to maybe look at some other similar communities to see what their lighting articles look like, you know, if they stand out, if they're, you know, completely different from this. But I know most towns do have a lighting article, so I think this might be something. How do the members feel about taking maybe 20 minutes, or is this something people would like to look at on their own and come back with specific comments on this? Maybe because it's 9:30 now, maybe we go with that approach. I just don't want to put it off, because I do want to let people feel like, you know, we did listen, and we've heard that this is something that people are interested in.
I'd like to suggest the latter of that, because I have started to look at what some of the other communities' bylaws are. And I wanted to spend a little bit more time
Yeah.
on that, because
Same,
there is
yeah.
a model bylaw that the Dark Sky Association has. And you know, some of the ones that are on the Massachusetts chapter of that, they have links to a lot of towns' lighting bylaws, and some are just really simple and some are more complex. And so I'd like to have time to kind of cross-compare them a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, because I think that was, you know, something that my conversation, that I had suggested, you know, Josh, if he could help us with that, but maybe looking at some of those other communities. I think because some are very detailed, they divide the towns into zones, you know, areas,
Right.
and I think that's probably not what we want. We want something.
Yeah, the Dark Sky Association
Yeah.
sample bylaw does that, I think.
Right.
And that's probably more than what we need.
Yeah, I
because
think
we
Tim
don't-
felt the
yeah.
same way, so.
I did want to point something out that I thought was interesting. Cambridge had a committee. Now, Cambridge is a different scale
Yeah.
altogether. But they also had this, which is I thought was interesting, good neighbor lighting, and it was like an informational piece for residents. You know how we talked about scenic roads having
Yeah.
an informational piece? But this just like shows them, people, like so that they're aware of what their bylaw for lighting is in sort of more simple terms, and who to contact if they have questions.
That's great.
And so I thought something like that could be pretty useful, like, you know, showing what a dark sky compliant light is. And maybe you can go further than this and have photographs of some. And then other bylaw had like a diagram of where the light cutoff is, like what a non-compliant is, where it shows like kind of light going up and out. And then it showed a diagram of what a cutoff is. And so I think helping people visualize what some of the language is could be helpful too. So I've forgotten now which town
towns?
had that diagram. And then I saw one town, and again, I'd like to be able to kind of document some of these things I was looking at, but where they gave 5 years to be compliant. And then if there was still a lack of compliance, then they had next measures for existing. So that was for new, we talked about existing as being one of the larger concerns here, right?
Right.
So grandfathering or not. I think since we talked about this, I've seen some photos that people have sent of a particular at Furnace Pond. And to say that, that would continue forever would be difficult. Some said when you change or upgrade your lights in any way, that's a trigger for being compliant. So, there can be triggers for compliance that are not just new construction, because
sale of a
who's going
home.
to do new, Milton's mostly built out, right? So if you're going to change your lighting, you can ban certain kinds of lamps, doesn't mean you're banning the fixture itself, So it's like when we went from incandescent to fluorescent to, it looked like you take out your little incandescent bulb and you screw it on a fluorescent. Now you can screw it in LED. And, you can, anyway.
So let's take more time. Let's go, look at the things that we like maybe about what the select board members who presented this to us, or maybe other towns, what seems would be appropriate for in
So
Milton.
my question is, do we need a bylaw? Can't we just do guidelines, like a good neighbor, like Cheryl was saying?
This was in conjunction with the bylaw.
I think you need a bylaw to give it an AT to make it law.
And this
essentially.
came about because of the Turner's Pond incident? Other than before that, we never had a lighting bylaw?
It came to us as, I think that was part of it.
Yes.
But I've always thought, actually, I was surprised to hear that Milton did not have one, because most towns do.
Anytime we get a special permit application, it's required to have a photometric plan with light information. So on those, we do look at it.
So
and we
multifamily
require-
housing, yeah. So
Any of our new zoning is
Commercial.
required to be dark
Yeah.
sky
Commercial and
compliant.
residential, or
through
just
us.
commercial?
Anything.
anything that comes through us.
Really, so I
But
just
this
changed.
is residential.
I just changed my light fixture Tuesday. And so I went, got a new one, and it's all dark sky compliant, all the newer ones. So I'm just an average resident, and I took out my big spotlights and I changed the whole fixture. And so that's why I think that's good neighbor
yeah.
policies.
Yeah.
And I'm not always a fan of more and more laws, because I think that could promote unneighborly situations. So we can look at it if you want.
But
'cause
let's
it's-
don't forget that the bylaw could even apply to things like, if you live, like, at one point, we had people who came to us about Curry College's lights on their fields being on. I mean, frankly, I have neighbors who have backyard hockey rink things that have lights on them, right on the property line. So, there are situations where it's not the only situation, this most recent one. It's just I think most people don't know what to do about it, and we're about to do another field. The high school is going to be flooded with lights with all the fields.
Well,
Anyway,
we would regulate the fields, right, as the planning, but we wouldn't need to pass a bylaw for that, would we?
We actually don't get
we don't get to regulate that field.
for the fields.
So they can put up lights just blaring everywhere and no one's going to
always-
say anything about it?
Well, no, they are,
Yeah, I mean, there's no
I have a hard
bylaw
time
that
believing
controls
that.
it.
Well, I think we're with anything that comes before, our board, when we do comment on lighting, we are mandating some restrictions on lighting. We're already doing it,
for what we control.
Yeah, for what we can control. I'm actually in favor of it. I think an awful lot of people don't do anything about it because there is no guide on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So, I think it's a good thing. I mean, I've worked in an awful lot of towns, and many towns have guidelines on lighting, and I think it'll be helpful for us to have. I don't think it's really going to infringe on people's rights. It's just going to correct some some probably incorrect behaviors. But what I struggle with is, it's the same thing I've said in the past, and I know we're not going to talk at length about this one tonight, but I struggle with forcing people to go back and change something that they've installed and have installed for years. It's not causing any issue or trouble to a neighbor. No one's complaining about it, yet this idea of having them comply with it just doesn't make sense to me. I look at zoning the same way. If zoning changes, we don't go back and tell people that don't comply with new zoning, but you have to change your property to comply with it. So, what I think we have to come up with is a mechanism so that some of those conditions, can be fixed. Can be fixed. And I do think your suggestion at the time of a transaction, if the house is sold, absolutely, lighting has to now comply with. It has to be fixed at that point in time, or maybe there are some other thresholds. Maybe a situation where, if 4 abutters, approach the town with, opposition to the lighting that you're using, you got to fix it. But I think we have to come up with something that, is fair to all the residents in town, and yet maybe gives us an opportunity to address the really egregious ones. I just don't know what the mechanism is. But
That's why I think if we read a few of these other articles
yeah,
from, or bylaws from other communities, we'll get some ideas. But at least in my cursory look at about 6 of them today,
yeah.
it seemed like there was had some mechanism. So
There must be a basis for this that they wrote. I'd like to know the basis for the one that they wrote. And it was interesting when you got to the end of this, and I just wanted to, because it was kind of strange. I think when you get into the non-conforming section, and in item A says any residential lighting fixture or lighting installation that is installed and operated before the date of adoption of this bylaw shall be made to conform with the requirements of this bylaw or removed within 21 days. Okay, but then B says non-conforming residential lighting shall not be changed to any other non-conforming lighting. So
that increases your degree of nonconformance.
I know,
Don't make
but-
it worse.
No, but my point is, A says you got to get rid of it if it's non-conforming,
yeah,
then B says if it's non-conforming,
I
it can't be
gotcha,
made more
gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
non-conforming. It's a little confusing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I just wonder if at one point in time, the way this was drafted, B was what they were, saying, if you have non-conforming lighting, it can't be made more non-conforming, and A just got added to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
I see.
if you're going to have
B
A,
shouldn't be there.
B shouldn't be there if
with
you're going to have
yeah,
A.
Understood.
But
And I'm
That's
just,
probably
I'm
what
also concerned about times, that you have to shut off your lights by. People work different shifts.
You could, but you know what? It's so easy to have sensors now.
Right,
They're just
right.
so. It used to be that those were kind of exotic, but they're not anymore. They're so easy to have.
yeah, I think the
And-
sensors work great. I mean, we've had some issues with break-ins, in vehicles in our neighborhood, and I put a spotlight on my garage. It works so well. Any movement in the driveway, that light goes on, but it's probably gone off in 60 seconds. The sensors are great.
Yeah, like when we do, again, some site plan approvals or special permits, we require sensors.
Yeah.
And it's really out of respect for, neighboring properties that the lights aren't always on off hours. I mean, it does affect people's
Winter
sleep
Valley, we
patterns.
asked
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And the height of light poles, we
And we've asked for
things
them,
on.
not to be on at night, not to park up in that lot at night, right? So for the memory care too, right? So it's,
yeah. Good, all right, so we'll spend, folks can look at, and see if we can come up with something that might be reasonable for.
So what if we send some samples to Josh and he can compile it and maybe
That would
do
be-
a little chart? Does that seem reasonable?
Josh, is that something you could handle,
Absolutely, Meredith.
or Tim?
I think they're falling asleep.
We lost him.
Oh, sorry. I was saying absolutely.
Okay, great, that's good. So if anyone comes across something, we'll send it to you, Josh, and, we'll be able to discuss for comparisons. That's
So
great.
my other question was, Josh had emailed us a list of, we had requested a list of all the other bylaws that have kind of been asked to us, you know, and he put the
Things that-
years, he put
yeah,
the years
yeah.
down. So I'm wondering, do you think we should start with the ones that are from 10 years ago that have never been,
I think we should
know.
talk about the list, if we could, at least at one meeting, and
Sure,
I mean,
yeah,
that's what
we
we
can do
used to
that.
do, and
Let's
talk
put that-
about
we
the
can put
full
that on.
list, and then say, okay, here is everybody, what do we think is the first thing we're going to work on?
Yeah,
What's the second one
prioritize
we're going
it.
to work
I
on?
agree. Yeah.
Yep, I think that's a great idea, so we can add that on. Yeah, because some I was not familiar with, they predate, you know, my being on the board and haven't followed, so, yeah, I think that's great. These, I just felt like maybe are simple ones also we could check off, so we might want to, with everything else we have going on, just trying to think of some things, but I think that's a great idea to put the list together on an agenda. And the other thing is just because there's just been a couple of issues on the signs, which we actually, there was a change, you, I'm sure were on the board when there were some revisions to the way sign reviews were done. When an applicant comes before the town for a sign, they're given everything for commercial areas. There's been a couple of things that, just in conversation that Tim and I have had, that have been an issue for the sign review committee. And because I think the sign review committee does a great job. And because they have a guidebook basically on what their standards are and guidelines for what you can and cannot do. What has been an issue on a couple of different signs, and this is not anything retroactive, this would just be going forward, is one of the things that's not clarified in the bylaw is, but it's in the handbook that the design review committee, is that neon signs are not allowed. So if you want a neon sign, and now they're LED neon signs, but they still look like the regular neon, what's happened in a couple of different cases is that they, for whatever reason, say, even though it says you cannot have neon signs, the design review committee says, we deny your application. This can be actually, there's an appeal process that you can go before the select board. And what the select board has had to say is, well, it doesn't say it in our bylaw, so we really don't feel it's enforceable, even though it's in our handbook, and even this is the policy that has always been practiced in Milton, it doesn't say it in the bylaw. So a simple, and I've asked, Josh to look at, or Tim, it would be simply, you could put into the sign review under,
Would
I
you
think
put
under
it
where,
under the illumination section?
yeah, or it's actually under where the poles, I think it's, hold on. Oh, no sign, yeah. So it's on, I don't have a page, second to last page, but it will say, well, no sign shall use flashing, intermittent or unduly bright lights. No signs other than barber poles and time and temperature displays shall have Signs may only be illuminated by steady stationary light. Sign may be illuminated for business operating after sunset only during its hours of operation. It would just be a matter of adding an E.
Yeah.
And I would, Tim and Josh can talk to town council and say, how do we, no neon signs or neon signs, whether LED or not, are not permitted, something along that. And just add just a really simple thing. The other thing that Tim mentioned, again, not changing this bylaw by anything significant, is that Tim said one thing that we're also exposed, and this came up recently, is that we don't have anything in our bylaws that prohibits billboards. And Tim, do you want to just mention that?
Yeah, the billboard question is kind of an interesting one because it's the type, and neon signs is all, I haven't been in town as long as a lot of you, but I've been in town long enough to know that, like, we just don't do neon signs. Everyone knows that, right? Well, but it actually isn't in the bylaw. Billboards is the same thing, and there's a certain level of protection in the sense that you can't have a sign in a residential district, and most of the town is residential. And so, the opportunities to put a billboard are sort of not there. But, you may recall maybe a year ago at this point, maybe a little bit less, but there was a proposal for a billboard at the 2 Granite Avenue site. And the mechanism by which that got reviewed was through the select board needing to sort of make a recommendation on a application to MassDOT for the MassDOT has a process under the sort of Federal Highway Beautification Act or whatever it is, to basically review, you can't have a billboard within X number of feet of a highway, within Y number of feet of other things. And so it was just a sort of a weird, out of the ordinary kind of process by which to review a sign that I think everyone, I can't say everyone, but I think a lot of people in town would say, no, of course we don't want a billboard, especially an electronic LED billboard that you see a lot recently. And so I've been working with the town administrator's office and with town council on a process of, MassDOT has a protocol for basically creating kind of sign-free corridors and sign-free districts. And there's different criteria in terms of proximity to historic areas, proximity to sensitive environmental areas. And, kind of what we felt was, between Milton Hill, Milton Village, and Railway Village, and the Neponset Estuary ACEC, all of the commercial areas where billboards could be potentially placed could meet the criteria for this sort of sign-free corridor, program that MassDOT has. What I think, and I don't know if we ever sort of heard back formally from them, but, in the conversations that I had, I think, what the response was, why don't you just ban them in your bylaw before you go through this sort of really elaborate kind of complicated sideways sort of MassDOT process. And so, here we are. It's a relatively simple thing, and from a kind of there's a lot of case law and constitutional law about sign bylaws, but I mean this is a very clear, very much within the zoning's capacity to regulate size, illumination, location, orientation, all of these things that can be used to take a billboard and go and just make it go away. So that's a long story, but it's just sort of a kind of an illustration of, you think you're protected from these things, but really it's because no one's actually brought it up before. And so we've had 2 instances in the recent past where, there are pretty clear fixes for this sort of thing. And Meredith, if you don't mind, I have one more other thing that was sort of a little bit of a kind of a pet peeve of Joe Prondak's. And I think if our new building commissioner starts to see some more sign applications, it'll become one of his pet peeves as well, is that the sign bylaw that we have only applies to signs in the business district. And so when you have either signs that are part of a pre-existing non-conforming use, or signs that are in a residential zone by special permit or variance, or signs that are, on a property via special permit from the planning board, like Seasons Hospice is a great example. The sign bylaw doesn't regulate those. And so any process for reviewing and approving those signs becomes a little bit less formal, a little bit more ad hoc. And, Joe always was of the opinion that, we should, all signs for commercial and otherwise types of uses, irrespective of where they are in town, because we do have a fair number of, non-business district businesses in town, should fall under the sign bylaw, fall under the regulations that every other sign has, and really formally go into that sign review committee process. So that's another potential adjustment to the bylaw.
Thank you, Tim. I forgot to mention that one. Yeah.
Hey, can I mention our comment on that grandfathering? Is there a way that we cannot have grandfathered? Because we've had businesses change at one location in East Milton, and that sign, Meredith, I'm sure you're familiar with it, where there was, because of the grandfathering, new businesses and new property owners have been able to do the kind of a lit sign that otherwise wouldn't be allowed. And normally, when you have something grandfathered, once you change that in that capacity, it's no longer grandfathered. So is there a way to change that in this zoning?
Apparently, they go before every year, they go before the sign review committee, and they get denied every year. And they just keep it
And
up.
it's the select board, though, because they say that they don't have any teeth to go by.
Yeah.
I'm just asking if we
Yeah.
can get rid of that kind of grandfathering, not for the same business, because that wouldn't make sense. But when a new business comes in or a new ownership comes in, it seems to me the grandfathering should be done.
What I'm familiar with, Cheryl, in most towns everywhere, that the new occupant is typically allowed the same square footage that the previous occupant had. So, if someone had 300 square feet of signage, that can be maintained. That's common in many, many towns. Now, it's different, maybe illumination, maybe the square footage can be allowed, but if there's an illumination there that,
I mean, the idea for that sign was to be a billboard sign.
Yeah.
And not be called the billboard, but it's to be seen from the highway.
yeah.
And that's the kind of thing, if people talk about village character,
Yeah.
to me, those kinds of signs have more negative impact than architecture.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree.
Features, yeah.
I agree. What sign is
I
it?
know.
Is it a
The
sign?
rebuilt fitness.
Yeah, and
It used to be
a
the sleep-
change of,
It was that, yeah.
yeah, is it a change
It was
of
Kennedy
just
first.
occupant, or is it change of owner?
Both.
This is
Because
tenant.
if it's the same owner of the building
Because it was Kennedy
who
Carpets
got the
originally.
original permit, does he still own it? So it's been the same
Good question.
owner,
I don't know.
it's just the occupants.
I think the tenant, it should be the tenant, because tenants are required to get their own sign permits typically. And so it should go with I think it should end with the tenant if we want to have any protections. Otherwise,
Yeah.
any new sign is just subject to what's already there. And there's signs everywhere in every business district. So how are we going to do design guidelines that have any teeth if they all get to be grandfathered?
Yeah, and I'm not for it.
I'm looking at you, I'm just.
Yeah, I know,
because
I'm
you're
not
straight
for it,
across
but
the table
that's,
from me, but.
but that's, and to be honest with you, there is one illuminated sign that I would hate to see ever go away. And I love looking at it when they light it up. And that's the Pepsi sign.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Walter Baker chocolate.
No, and that I love, but I'm on my side of town.
Oh,
Cheryl, just to your point, I know that this has been discussed and researched in the past relative to that sign. So I'll talk to town council and kind of see, what the options are there. I don't want to get too far over my skis. I also want to say that I'm delighted that Sean didn't immediately know which sign it was, because I just feel like I thought everyone knew that it was the sleepy sign, but I think that's great.
I must be going north too much, Tim. I'll start.
No, I just it's just like it was one of the, it was such a big deal when I first got here as the assistant town planner. It's died down a little bit, but I mean, I think, if that was ever going to be a new business again, I think it would kind of flare back up, because it's just one of these sort of foundational Milton things, the Kennedy carpet signs, just,
Yeah.
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 Cheryl, it might be a landmark at this point. It's so historically significant in this town.
Well, I hope not.
I'm being fresh. I'm kidding around.
that's
But I
great.
support the other things that you've
good.
suggested. I do think that on that list, there was something about the residential signs for businesses in residential districts. And I think it had to do with signs in residential districts because of a Supreme Court case that I think has been decided. But that's why it had been tabled by the planning board in the past, to wait for that decision. But if it can be rolled into one bylaw, or one section of the bylaw for all businesses, whether they're in a business district or any other district, that seems to make sense.
So Tim, is that something that you can work on, just getting legal language that would meet those goals? And have
Yeah,
something that
we
you
can
present?
certainly work on that. And there's everyone's got a sign bylaw, and there's a lot of good ones out there. And as Cheryl alludes to, there's been relatively recent kind of First Amendment case law on this. So there's been a lot of new and recent thinking on sign bylaws. So we'll be able to find something.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. And then the last thing, Tim, do you want to just talk a little bit about the zoning recodification and how we go next steps?
Yeah. So I think there's two, there's two things to talk about. I mean, first of all, we'll see what comes back from the Attorney General based on the bylaw amendment that was passed at the annual town meeting. That will give us some good direction if something comes back from the AG's office and they say you've got to amend this, that, or the other thing. That'll give us some direction. The other thing is, and we've talked about this briefly a couple times, and I think we sort of wanted to focus on just sort of getting the thing recodified and then kind of taking steps afterwards. But as part of our original contract with General Code, they produced this editorial and legal analysis that basically goes beyond simply renumbering and kind of reformatting the bylaw and starts to actually look at the content and say this is a reference to state law that has been repealed or has been amended. This is an element of a bylaw that other towns do in a different way. Do you want to consider really sort of doing some of that really initial basic level sort of substantive review of the bylaws? And I think especially on the things where, things that are enabled by state law, that refer to state law, that are no longer operative, is something that they've already done that work for us. And we should probably take a good long look at it. I think the benefit of the editorial and legal analysis is it kind of functions as like a homework assignment or like a workbook or a standardized test, where, you can literally go in and say, here's their proposed change. And then they give you multiple choice, make the change, don't make the change, make a different change. And then you propose whatever that change is. So, the concern that we've always had with this recodification is when you start to make substantive changes, how do you keep track of that so that it can be reviewed and understood? The general code analysis makes it really easy. If the planning board decides we're going to make all of these changes, there's already a document there that you can give to every town meeting member and say, these are the changes that we're making. And it's all pegged to the manuscript that general code produced. So it's already sort of in the format that we've adopted. So that's something that the board may want to consider, perhaps not for December, maybe December might be busy, or maybe not, but, for a relatively recent, or short-term future town meeting to sort of take a look at that and just do that sort of basic cleanup. The second element, and at Meredith's behest, I gave a call to Bob Mitchell, who is a zoning specialist in the Commonwealth. He's actually part of Meredith. Was he on the UTL team
Yes.
for the East Milton
Yes.
zoning? He was on it. So
And his resume, and that's where it just had recodification of, half of the state of Massachusetts.
yeah,
Extensive.
he's done this 1,000 times. He's the guy. He's just a legend in the field on this stuff. So I had a conversation with him a few weeks ago, just about like what does step 2 look like? And he's actually I didn't provide it in this go around just because we wanted to keep it a little bit lighter, but he did give me some examples of recent codifications that he's done that he thinks may sort of be applicable to Milton. And they include Falmouth is a very recent one that he thought was kind of most matched our situation. Andover was a little bit more understated than the Falmouth example, but also relevant. And then he also recently did Kingston. And the way that he kind of explained the way that he approaches this is, if the goal is to make things readable and understandable, he really gets in there. And if the sort of the rallying cry for the vote that we took in May was everything's the same, it's just moved around a little bit. The rallying cry for sort of the type of work that he does is we're getting in there, we're making cuts, we're giving some elbow room, lots of color, lots of white space, lots of diagrams, lots of tables, really getting in there and kind of, and what it requires is kind of a fundamental conversation among the planning board about, what are our goals here? What do we want out of this bylaw? So again, it's not necessarily an issue of, you know, going in and saying like, all right, we want to change the height requirements and we want to change the minimum lot sizes, and you know, those are things that have a really sort of profound effect on zoning's effect on the built environment. You can do that obviously if you want. You can amend and propose amendments to whatever zoning you want to do, but this is more about like, you know, how do you make this document a clean, coherent, consistent document, and that sometimes does involve deletions of things, and really sort of moving things around and kind of, you know, I hesitate to use the term rewriting, but there is an element of rewriting things, you know, in a lot of cases to sort of make them more clear, make them more internally consistent. Um, you know, a lot of and you see, you know, one of the things he said is, you know, the original sin of a lot of, you know, zoning bylaws is just the wordiness and the density of the text. And that's kind of like the first thing that he does is sort of go in and find these dense blocks of text, try to blow them up, and really get at the heart of what they're trying to say. So, you know, without having looked at Milton's bylaw, he sort of glanced at it just to sort of know what we're talking about. But again, he's done so many of these, and there's a handful of other folks in Massachusetts that do this sort of work in a similar fashion. But you know, almost every town kind of wants the same thing. It's like, you know, our building commissioner is struggling, our, you know, development community is struggling, homeowners are struggling, and they need something that's just user friendly, easier to understand. And, you know, there's a lot of best practices around that. So um, I think, you know, step one is sort of maybe taking a look at some recent examples. You know, he provided a few. We can probably find other ones of, you know, who do you think is doing a zoning bylaw right, and what do you like, and kind of, you know, having a good understanding of, you know, what do we think the problem is here. I think over the course of years we've identified, you know, certain issues. I think, you know, one thing that kind of was a necessary evil in the recent recodification was we sort of, I thought it was a great idea to take all of the sort of one-off PUD special permits and kind of shuffle them off to the back. They kind of made their way back into the middle of the text, just by virtue of just sort of how general code had to do things. But that's the type of thing, you know, where you say like, how are people actually using this bylaw? How do we want them to use the bylaw? And then kind of from there, kind of, you know, figuring out what the best solutions are. So it sounds daunting, and this is something that Bob said, you know, every town kind of starts to think like, oh my goodness, this is our zoning. But if you look, so many towns have done this, and it's kind of, you know, everyone kind of breathes a sigh of relief at the end. So you know, there's a universe of possibilities out there. I think every town, you know, again, like I said, thinks it's an overwhelming task, but you know, zoning, everyone is governed by 40A. A lot of people are doing the same things, and it just becomes a matter of, you know, I think you know, the big deal in Falmouth was they had, you know, 57 sections in their zoning bylaw. You got it down to like 17 or something like that. So you know, there's a lot of possibilities out there, and I think it just comes down to, you know, the planning board kind of figuring out, you know, what do we want, you know, what are some good examples of things that we think look good, and function well, and then kind of going from there.
I have wanted to see us have a dimensional table, a use table. Every zoning code that I work, you know, as my day job as an architect, you look at the zoning code and you have a use table, you have a dimensional requirements table, and you have definitions that tie back to everything. We don't have that. That's what makes it so difficult to understand and work with. And it's hard for our board, it's hard for the Zoning Board of Appeals, it's hard for property owners, applicants, the building official. At a minimum, we should have that. And I'll just say, like, I've been doing some work in Brookline. You go, and it's easy to find what you're looking for. The definitions, like you look at what open space, how you calculate open space requirements, what your setbacks are, it's all very clear. Ours, you jump here, oh, I gotta go jump there, and you get, by the time you're done, you're not sure what your requirements are. And then the last thing I'll say about it is the searchability. When I was clicking on the lighting ones, some of them it takes you right there because it's that same kind of general code thing. You can click the box and download the PDF just of the lighting section. Others, it's like it tells you, okay, go to section 6.10.3 on page 20, and then you have the whole PDF. It's like Milton, and then you have to try and extract those few pages that you want, and it's hard to find, and you scroll through the whole thing. It's just so much easier. So I am a big advocate for not just stopping with getting it tinkered with a little bit more to get it up to date with state requirements. I support at least having it be less wordy, have tables, have clear definitions, and I'm happy to hear what other suggestions
And
this
it's
guy
nice
has.
to know, because I feel like we really do need a lawyer to guide us through this. I mean, Alex is irreplaceable, and his mind and his understanding of zoning, but having someone and Bob Mitchell is an attorney, and I think that's absolutely necessary in anything that we do and
Well,
how we
zoning is
evaluate.
certainly is law, so.
Is law, so that, Alex would always say that.
So I had heard that it would take like $40,000 to do that kind of work on the zoning. Tim, did he give you any indication of what that dollar amount might be? I think we requested 40,000 it didn't make it into this year's budget, but is that the number?
Yeah, that was the ask. I didn't ask Bob. I actually I asked Judy. Judy actually works with Bob on a lot of these projects. Just because I had a conversation with her for it, but between 30 and 50, depending on kind of your menu of options, is kind of typical. So I think that was kind of a right on the nose estimate.
So we're looking at likely, I mean, this fiscal year, are we thinking we're going to need dollars for the MBTA communities or East Milton Square out of our budget, this coming fiscal year budget that starts in a week or so?
I would think so.
Yes, Jim. You're muted.
I think it's safe. I think it's a good idea to assume that we will.
And so we have 50,000. So we're not looking at really being able to do it with this fiscal year dollar. Okay, which is too bad.
Yeah.
Well, how much do we have in our, budget now? Remaining at the end of this year?
Do we have funds remaining, Tim?
We do, but you've got to. You need to get someone under contract between now and
Next week?
8 days from now, and you'd have to do a procurement, and there's no time to do something like that.
There's no way.
I said, could he send us an invoice? And
Yeah, no.
There's no way, accounting wise, to set that aside?
No. I mean, at the very, very, very least, you need to have a contract in place and like a purchase order in place
only if
to
it
potentially
exceeds
even think about
50, right?
encumbering those funds. And so it's not just like, hey, we really want to be able to do this in the near future. Can we put money away? You've got to use that out of your next year's
I have
operating
another
budget.
thought, thinking from my warrant committee days, that money's going to flow to free cash. Why can't we ask for a reserve fund transfer?
You can. I've never done it, which is not to say that it can't be done, but that would have to be something that the planning board would have to make that request.
We know it's flowing there.
great, yeah.
That's slick.
No, but because it's a sizable amount, Tim, isn't it? What is the balance?
Like 40.
40,000?
It'll wind up being less than 40,000. You all sort of gave me some money for the that Mass Trails project.
Yeah.
But it's more than $30,000 at this point because he spent 10,000 on the GLAM study. And I think that was the only money out of the plans and studies budget that you spent.
So Tim, do you need to talk to our town administrator about that then? What would be your process?
I'll talk to the town administrator and kind of see what the procedure would be, like, hey, the planning board, has an idea about, wanting to do some money. I mean, and I don't know how they're going to handle it. It's not something that's coming out of the clear blue sky. You did make a supplementary budget request for this exact purpose. So it's not like, this is just, hey, we want to spend money. It's like, no, this is something we've been wanting to do for quite some time. I just don't know exactly how they would go about doing that. So I can initiate that conversation, and when July 1 starts up, we can kind of figure out if there's a next step that we need to take.
All right, yeah, if you could update us on that, because this is a priority, I think, for the planning board to do this, get this recodification moving. And
For the whole town.
For the whole town.
For the whole town.
It really is. So, all right, that's terrific. Anything else, Tim, on that?
No.
Okay. So that concludes our agenda for tonight. We had some good ideas for future agenda items. Always feel free to reach out if there's other things that people want to put on the agenda, but this is great. So, you were going to say something? Or no?
No, I was just thinking whether that was the right account for it to come out of, sorry, but I'll think of it.
Free cash.
Free cash, yeah. But there was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the thing about free cash becomes, we don't know exactly how much free cash we have until the state certifies that number, and that number is always late. So it's kind of, my instinct and my experience has been, free cash, you sort of punt that forward to the next sort of year.
Yeah, but here.
I'll talk to Nick about it and see kind of what the options could potentially be.
Yeah, just, with the logic that we're giving that money back. And it's just a timing issue. So it's not like we're asking for somebody else's money that they turned back in, right? We're asking for our own money back, yeah.
I think it's a valid argument, and we'll see if it has legs.
Good. All right. So with that, we are ready to adjourn. If I can have a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thanks.
Sure.